of Dominica. When I said that, I meant that I can now interview you. I know when you were the president of Dominica, it was not something that you could have done. Now that you're no longer the president of Dominica, I can almost have you in the studios of DBS Radio, and we can speak on almost any and everything.
That would be my pleasure.
That's what we're here for to do. I know that you have heard of the LACU program. Tell us what your views of the LACU program.
Well, I can't say that I have heard much about the LACU program because I have not been paying very close attention to it. But I do know that you have conversations with various people at various times.
Well, that's the LACU program where we speak to people on their growing up, the things that they did, and many times our society helps to make us who we are. So that is what we're going to be speaking with you tonight, and a number of other issues. So I know that there's quite a number of people who are tuned and listening to the Nation station to hear your views on a number of matters, and that's what we're going to be doing. First of all, Mrs. Savarin, I want you to help us by telling us from your background, the name of your parents, any siblings, I think that you had, the schools that you went to, especially your primary schools, your infant schools, if you went to preschool, and we'll start from there. And then we can go to the church, and then we can go to the other parts.
No problem, Cecil. My parents are from Portsmouth, both. My father, Stephen Savarin, and my mother, Natalia Savarin. They had 7 children. I am the fourth. I have 4 brothers. That is to say, there are 4 boys and 3 girls. So I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters. I'm right in the middle. I'm the 4th child. I attended the St. John's School in Portsmouth, but prior to that, I used to go with my aunt to the Clifton Government School. She was a teacher there. We lived with my grandfather at Hermitage Estate, and I would go with her to the Clifton School. So I spent about 2 years as an infant between 3.5 and 5 going to the Clifton Government School. Probably never enrolled because they enrolled children at age 5. And then at age 5, I went to the infant section of the St. John's School, then to the senior section. And from that, came to the Dominica Grammar School in 1956. Spent 7 years at the Dominica Grammar School, 5 years up to 5th form, and then 2 years in the 6th form.
But before you go to that part of the program, because we're going to come into education, I want you to help us to the listeners in reference to the community of Portsmouth where you were raised, the things that help in your development as a boy growing up. What did you see your parents would have done that helped you to be where you are, or the things that you would have seen or heard in your community of Portsmouth, and how you yourself, engage, and by your engagement, you become that stalwart that you are today?
Well, Portsmouth was a small community. It was the second town of Dominica, still is. And my parents were church-going people. My mother was very committed to the Catholic Church. My father as well. My father migrated to Curacao with a lot of other people from Dominica and elsewhere in the Eastern Caribbean to work in the oil refinery business that was very important in Curacao and Aruba in the 40s and early 50s. My mother, therefore, was sort of mother and father in the early stages of my growing up, very strict, and because she had to deal with 5 of us, and then the 6th, and then the 7th. She was a seamstress primarily, and also you might say a handicraft person because she built hats with straw and did some straw work and things of that nature. But she did prepared people for weddings, women's bridal gowns and bridesmaids and so forth, made wedding cakes and first communion cakes and first communion outfits and so on. So basically she was a housewife, and in those days the home was also an economic unit. People produced things in their homes. They either did backyard gardening or they kept animals and so on. She was a seamstress. She believed in education. She wanted all of her children to have an education. So at great sacrifice to herself and to my parents, my father and my mother, we all attended secondary school. My first brothers went to the grammar school. My sister went to the convent. I came to the grammar school. My other sister came to the convent. My brother Ozzy came to the grammar school. And then the Portsmouth Secondary School was opened. And my sister, Marianne, who began at the convent high school, transferred to the Portsmouth Secondary School to complete her secondary education.
No, Mr. Savarin, I also would like to know, in reference to your growing up in Portsmouth, what was the in thing of the day while growing up? Was it fishing? Was it...
Well, Portsmouth was a sort of a small cosmopolitan community in that the market for the north was in Portsmouth, the bank for the north was in Portsmouth, the major church for the north, the hospital for the north, so that there was a certain confluence of people from Capuchin, Vickers, Penville, Dodan, Ansdeme, Calabishi, and sometimes Colliho and Dubla that came into Portsmouth. That is where the main activities in the north of the island took place. The people of Portsmouth themselves were engaged as fishermen. There was a lot of fishing that took place in Portsmouth. Bananas were a very important industry, and because the reception station was at Longhouse in Portsmouth, a lot of people in and around the Portsmouth area were employed at Longhouse, either as selectors, banana carriers, and so on. And the truckers brought in bananas into Longhouse. My father was a trucker, so I spent some nights on his truck at Longhouse as well, because he carried bananas into Longhouse. So
That's interesting, Mr. Savarin. Don't just pass on this one by telling us that your father was a trucker, and there were some nights that you slept with your father, you worked with your father. Tell us a little bit more of that. I want to know a little bit more of that.
Bananas was a very big thing, and you had long lines of trucks, just as in Roseau. For people who don't know Portsmouth, you'd sometimes have lines of truck from Wavincock and beyond under the Canefield Cliff, lining up to get into the harbour to be weighed and for the bananas to be offloaded and selected and all of that. That happened in Portsmouth too, and trucks would back up all the way into Granville. So if you were in the line, you had to wait your turn, and sometimes it took a couple hours before you actually got to the weighbridge, and then to the banana shed where your bananas were offloaded and selected, and what was rejected was thrown back into the truck. So we did that. I did that for many years.
Your father drove for other people, or was his bananas?
No. He carried bananas. It was his truck, but he carried bananas for other people. He was a small farmer. We grew some bananas, and naturally we brought our own bananas to Longhouse. But he also carried bananas all the way from Penville, sometimes, Cottage, into Portsmouth.
No, Mr. Savarin, I want to find out, in reference to you and your rest of your siblings, having to come to Roseau in those early days, and having to get to high school. That's more. That's where I want to get to. Getting to high school, people would have said that a parent have 7 children to send to school. It would have meant that they had, in our colloquial term, l'argent. They had money. How would you claim that?
I would say it was extremely challenging. There were never 7 of us at school at the same time. But at one time there were 4 of us, but for most of the times there were 3 of us. And it was a tremendous sacrifice because your parents had to find somewhere for you to stay. In Roseau, we call that somebody had to board and lodge you. So you lived there, and your parents provided them with a stipend, and usually on a weekly basis would set up provisions to help with your meals. So that was a challenge for them. It wasn't, I would say, that we had the money, but there are several people who went to St. John's School with me who perhaps were brighter than I was, who did not go to secondary school because their parents could not afford. Fortunately for me and for us, my eldest brother got a scholarship. My eldest sister got a scholarship. I got a scholarship. So that assisted with the cost of our upkeep in Roseau. There were no school transfer grants and all of the benefits that we have now. And at that time, there also was no road between Roseau and Portsmouth, neither through Marigot nor through Collyho. So we came to Roseau by coastal launch. There were boats like the Stella Maris, the Lady Catherine, Caribbean Star, and all of these boats. So you would leave Portsmouth on the Portsmouth jetty, which was off Borough Square, and you would chug along the coast into Roseau. Sometimes the boat would stop and pick up people in Collyho or Dublin on the way to Roseau. And then when you came to the what is now the ferry terminal, that was the Roseau jetty. And from there you went to wherever it is that you were living, boarding and lodging.
Interesting story that you're saying that in that period in 1956 when you went to high school.
In 1956.
That you couldn't, or there was no roads leading to Portsmouth to get to Roseau, whether it's through Marigot or whether it's through the West Coast.
As a matter of fact, people from Marigot came to Portsmouth to catch lunch to go to Roseau.
So how the people from Marigot got to the Kalinago territory then?
I believe that there was a connection. I'm not quite sure the state of the connection, but there was a connection between Marigot and the Carib territory. But you could not drive from Marigot to get to Pont-Cassé. So I presume if you were going to Roseau, you got that far and you walked to pick up a vehicle on the other side to get into Roseau. But you could not drive from Marigot to Roseau, or therefore from Portsmouth to Roseau.
So what was the experience now, having to take the boat?
We called it the launch.
The launch, having to take the launch from Portsmouth Harbour to Roseau. What was the experience?
Well, it was something like a 2 or 2.5 hour journey. So you had to be up relatively early. Whatever it is you were carrying with you, you got on board. Some people did not have their sea legs, so it was not a comfortable journey for them. But you got accustomed to it. What happened was now, coming to school, you came into Roseau at the beginning of the term. You spent the entire school term in Roseau, and you went back to Portsmouth for the school holidays. So it was almost like going overseas to study. You didn't leave Portsmouth, come home and go back on weekends or go back in the same afternoon, as the case may be. You spent the entire term, 12 weeks, 13 weeks, in Roseau, and then you went back home for the school holidays.
And as you said, that the launch would stop in various communities to get people. How many people at any given trip? Would you remember?
I would think that the boat would carry perhaps about 30, I would say between 30 and 40 people.
Not many?
Well, not many people made the trip. For instance, when I came to school in 1956, there were only about perhaps 5 or 6 of us from Portsmouth going to secondary school in Roseau. At that time, there were 10 government scholarships, 5 for boys and 5 for girls. You didn't have universal access to secondary education. It was a very competitive exam that you sat. And those who were in the top 5 boys got a scholarship and the top 5 girls got a scholarship. And that was the only assistance for secondary education that was received from the state.
So in reference to discipline, Mr. Savarin, sorry.
Yes.
In reference to discipline, how discipline was kept at home, in the house? Because you now have to take that type of discipline that was given to you into someone else's home. How was that done?
Well, you were taught to behave. My mother was very strict. And you were taught to respect other people's home and property. So I never really had any difficulties with the places where I board and lodged. I mean, you were not at home, so you behaved yourself.
Now, let's focus a little bit on the church before I get into Roseau. You said that your parents were staunch Catholics.
Yes.
And so yourself.
Absolutely.
So were you an altar boy, an acolyte?
My mother did not want her boys to be altar boys. She said that they stole the priest's wine and sometimes interfered with the collection. So she didn't want to, although there were 4 of us, none of us were altar boys. I think perhaps very briefly my eldest brother might have been, but she didn't approve.
Wow, that is strange to hear that. I know in my time, every mother would want their child to be an altar boy.
She had been very close to the presbytery. I think her mother worked at the presbytery, so she knew what was taking place there. And she didn't want her boys. There were no female altar servers. So since she was aware that some of the acolytes, in fact, drank the priest's wine, and some of them interfered with the collection, she didn't want to expose her sons to that temptation at all.
No, I want to find out what a Sunday life was like in Portsmouth.
It is amazing. Because, of course, the first responsibility was to go to church. You had what they call Children's Mass and High Mass. So the Children's Mass was the early Mass. And the first thing that you did, you got up, you prepared for church, and you went your Sunday best and went to church. You spent an hour or an hour and a half in church, and then you came back home. And one of the things that I remember very distinctly is when you walk the street now from the church to my home is about 2 or 3 blocks. All the way coming down Rodney Street, you would smell meat stewing, left side, right side, and you had that aroma. And then you came home and the same thing was happening. So because you had to do that before the adults now went to High Mass, because that was about 9 o'clock and lasted for about 2 hours. So by the time they came back home, and there was always this sort of after-service get-together by friends. You would linger under the belfry, they would walk down in groups and so on. So it took a very long period to get home from church for the adults. So they began to prepare the lunch before going to church, before going to High Mass.
As we are speaking about Marigot, someone said, that's Urban Roy, he said that there was a spring bridge between Marigot to the Kalinago territory. So he's just giving us some information.
But not motorable.
But not, right, that's correct. No, Mr. Savarin, I want to know in reference to the meals on a Sunday. Did you had your meals before you went to service, or after you came from service you didn't eat?
No, meals were about between 12 and 2. So everybody had gone to church. You because you were not supposed to eat before taking Holy Communion. So you sort of fasted from Saturday night, and probably that is why Children's Mass was earlier, so you could break your fast after Mass. But so lunch was after Children's Mass, after High Mass, between 12:30 and 2 o'clock.
That's a tradition in every community, it looks like, because when I went to church, I didn't have to take breakfast. It was like a scene. It's a cardinal scene.
You had to prepare yourself, as it were, to receive Holy Communion. and fasting was one of the ways of preparing yourself.
Was there any segregation in church at that time? I know that in the early days in the city of Roseau, in town, Roseau, that there was some kind of segregation where the elites of the community had their seats paid for, and if you would find yourself sitting on their seat, they would ask you excuse.
Well, you rented pews, and so you sort of knew where your pew was. I wouldn't call it segregation. Remember, I grew up in Portsmouth. I can't speak for what happened in Roseau in those very early days. But I presume it was a way. In some other churches, you pay what they call a tithe or whatever the case may be. So I presume it was a way of making a financial contribution to the upkeep of the church. And you rented or you paid whatever. I do not know what the figure was where I was a child. But you made a contribution towards having a pew in the church.
I'm tempted to ask you if your parents did that.
Yes, I would presume. I don't. These are not things you discuss with children. I mean, you know, there was. If you want to talk about segregation, there was an adult community and there was a children's community, and you owed respect to every adult, whether it was your parents or just adults in the community. So, adults' business, so to speak, was not children's business. So you would not discuss whether you paid or were owing rent for your pews. But I knew that people paid rent for the pews, and I would presume that my parents, like everybody else, paid rent for their pews.
I'm tempted to ask you about R.B.D. Douglas.
Yes.
Growing up, what did you make of R.B.D.?
Well, R.B.D. was a very important person in the community of Portsmouth. He was a merchant. They ran a store, a big store in Portsmouth. He was a landowner in the Hampstead area. He owned a lot of house lots in the Portsmouth area. And the Douglas family was a highly respected family in the town of Portsmouth.
And what kind of contribution that you would believe from what R.B.D. would have done that your parents would have wanted to emulate from that of R.B.D.? Well,
I believe that there was a relatively close relationship. In that, in the town of Portsmouth, everybody more or less had a close relationship with everybody else. When it came to the question of politics, there was a little rivalry because my father's brother-in-law, that was T.M. Bertrand, who would have been the father of Mrs. Phillip, Monlight Phillip, and Justice Sylvia Bertrand, and a couple of the boys, and so on. He ran for election to the Portsmouth Town Council. R.B.D. was also a political figure, and he also ran for election to represent the constituency to which Portsmouth belonged, and R.B.D. also ran. So there was, he served on the Portsmouth Town Council. He, that is T.M. Bertrand, served on the Legislative Council, but there was a certain political rivalry, not what exists now, the antagonism and that type of thing, but a certain political rivalry, somewhat like what existed between, say, the grammar school and the St. Mary's Academy on the field of sports and so on. I mean, when you were playing, you were a grammar school boy or grammar school supporter, or SMA boy or an SMA supporter, but after that, I mean, you were schoolboys, as the case may be.
What was condition like in Portsmouth, the roads, public convenience?
We had three main roads, that is to say what we call Front Street, or Bay Street is the proper name, Harbour Lane, which we called Back Street, and Rodney Street. These were paved. The road from the market to the hospital is Pembroke Street. that was also paved. And the road from Portsmouth going up to Marigat, that was also paved. But most of the roads in Zikak, which is to the east, most of the roads in Grenville, most of the roads in Lagong were unpaved. And there was no electricity at the time. And
you're saying in 1956 and above there was no electricity?
There was no electricity at that time.
Buzai.
Well, you had gas lamps or kerosene lamps. Or the gas lamp, I don't know if you know what a gas lamp is, but it had this reservoir which you pumped, and the fuel would vaporize, and there was a small, what we call a mantle, and you lit it, and you got a very bright light out of that. We call it a gas lamp. And of course, there were ordinary lamps, and then there were lanterns. So you didn't use a bullseye inside the house. You either had a lamp or lantern. And if you had a shop, you probably would have a gas lamp.
Telephones?
There was a telephone exchange, and you went to the exchange to make a phone call. You know, you had this handle that you cranked, and you say, hello, hello, can you hear me? And you'd give the operator the name of the person you wanted to be connected to, and they would, and then you would speak to the person. You had a two-piece. You had an earpiece and the mouthpiece, which was fixed to the unit, so you spoke into it, and you had the earpiece held close to your ear so that you would hear what the other person was saying.
Now let's get into the city, or let's get into the town of Roseau now. At that time it was town.
Yes.
You get into the town of Roseau via the launch.
Yes.
You arrive at the harbour, or the jetty. That's how you call it.
Jetty.
Right.
Yes.
The jetty, and then you would get to the location where you.
Yes, you would walk to. I lived in Pottersville at that time. There was only one bridge across the Roseau River in town, so that was that bridge into Pottersville, and of course there was the Battersea Bridge. Both bridges were what you call suspension bridges, and you walked. You carried your clothes and whatever else you had, and you walked to your home, your residence in Roseau.
So, what was your first trip to Roseau like? What was the excitement? What was the bubbling?
Well, I think my first visit to Roseau was to sit a scholarship exam. I think a benevolent exam, which some overseas Dominicans awarded on the basis of merit to Dominican students. So having sat the common entrance exam, but the results not been out as yet, and here was an opportunity for a scholarship through the Benevolent Scholarship Fund. So I came to Roseau because the Portsmouth was a center for the government, the island-wide common entrance exam. So you sat your exam in Portsmouth. But then I came to Roseau to sit the Benevolent Fund exam in the hope, well, if I didn't get a government scholarship, that, well, perhaps I would get a benevolent scholarship. Because perhaps if I didn't get a scholarship, I might not have gone to secondary school at all. As it turned out, I got both a government scholarship and a benevolent scholarship, but you had to choose, so I chose the government scholarship.
What was Roseau like then when at that time your mind is nothing about politics?
Well, as an 11-year-old, Roseau was fascinating for me. I remember seeing people fishing from the bridge and fishing from the riverbank with catching mullets. I found that very interesting. Of course, women washed clothes in the river. There were bigger houses in Roseau than there was in Portsmouth. There was electricity in Roseau, and most houses in Roseau had running water. So that was different to Portsmouth.
And did you say to yourself, I'm not going back to Portsmouth?
Never. No.
Right.
That thought
never
crossed my mind. Mm-hmm. I looked forward to school holidays, and I probably would either, if the boat was late and we could get to go down on the Friday afternoon when school closed, I would go the same day, but usually it was on the Saturday the next day. I was off. I never spent a school holiday in Roseau as a schoolboy.
So you lived in Pottersville. You would have met friends in Pottersville. You would have gotten maybe a culture shock coming to Pottersville to live and to see the life that you lived in Portsmouth and the life that you live in that you live in Pottersville. Tell us a little bit about the two lives.
Well, the thing is that an 11-year-old plus boy, your contact would mostly be with others who are also going to school. People like Sharp Elwin and things also lived in Pottersville at that time. So those would be your contact. There were people from Marigot, people like Edison James, Lloyd, and some Terry James, and these people who were also living in Pottersville. I lived in Elliott Avenue. They lived in Stibber Street. And as schoolboys, we would get together and so on, roam Pottersville together, as it were. And but you didn't have very much to do with the adults of the community. So you sort of formed a secondary school community, as it were, of neighbors.
Was it a comfort living with other people? Was it very comfortable?
It had its challenges. I mean, you are away from home. You because of your own upbringing, you sought to interfere as little as possible with the private lives of the person in whose home you had been welcomed, and you had a room assigned to you, so you spent most of your time there.
I'm sure sometimes you would hear at 7 o'clock or at 8 o'clock, my light has to go off.
There was this light out, and which was a little stressful because you had homework to do, and sometimes when the light out came, the curfew, if you want, or whatever you choose to call it, you may not have been finished. So you always had candles in your room, which again was frowned upon because candles can trip over and cause accidents. But you had to finish your homework. Oh. So you managed.
Now you're at school. You're in first form.
Second form. I entered school in the second form.
You entered school in second form?
Yes.
How so?
Well, scholarships and persons whose results were considered above average entered second form.
So at 11 years, you were already in second form?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, from second form going up, tell us what the life was at school, the things that you would have done at school.
Well, you did what every other schoolboy did, because remember, you only had boys at the grammar school. So in Roseau, you had the grammar school and the St. Mary's Academy, and you had the Convent High School and the Wesley High School. They were single-sex schools. The only girls at the Convent and the Wesley High School, and only boys at the SMA and the grammar school. So you played sports, you roamed around the place and so on, and some of us read comic books and so on. So you had an exchange going on. So you would what you had read already, you would go to exchange with somebody who had comics and may not have read what you read, and you would not have read what that person read, and so you had that type of stuff. And you similarly exchanged the books, because we went to the library and we also bought books. And so if you had read your book and somebody else had a book that you hadn't read, you would again do a book exchange and that type of stuff.
So in terms of the comic books, I'm sure it would have been about the First and Second World War.
There was that. There was H.E, Jughead, there was Tarzan, there was Superman, there were all of these things and so forth.
So these things are existing since in your time?
Indeed, they were.
Wow. I thought just in my time, those came in and the Vietnam War. That's why
there wasn't much. Well, the Vietnam War, I was already teaching at the grammar school.
No, that's what I'm saying. For me, in
Yes.
my time, it was the Vietnam. For you, it would I would believe. Yes, we read the H.E and the others, but for you to have been the First and Second World War, a bigger focus.
Not so,
necessarily.
there were a couple of GI Joes and things of that nature, but I was not particularly taken up by war comics. I preferred to read books where you would get a better understanding as to what it is that was taking place than just looking at pictures with little emojis attached to it.
No, academics.
Yes.
I've spoken to quite a number of people, and they have said to me how a very good economics teacher that you were. So which means that you would have been doing well at school. What was your favorite subject?
Geography, actually. I loved geography, and in those days you did both physical geography and human geography. And physical geography had a lot of science, how the earth was formed and the rainfall and weather systems and things of that nature. And human geography, how human beings related to the land and what impact the land had on human development and human settlement. And I found that fascinating. I also love science subjects, chemistry and biology. And I had a little, physics was a little challenging, although I loved maths, and physics is a lot of maths, but somehow I found physics a little challenging. And in the fifth form, we were introduced to economics and commerce. And I found that interesting as well.
And what about sports?
I played sports, but I would not consider myself as ever having been a top sportsman. I mean, I played for my house. I never played for the school. It wasn't good enough.
What house?
Benedict Joseph.
Okay, BJ.
BJ.
Okay. No, Mr. Savarin, like every boy who goes to high school, there is a rebellious side of him. Tell us, was there any?
I not really in the strictest sense of the word. I would not consider myself to have been a very troublesome boy at school. I did get disciplined once or twice. I did get sent to the detention once or twice. I did get caned probably once, maybe twice, not more in the 6-7 years. Because you didn't get caned in the sixth form except for extraordinary circumstances. So it's mostly in the lower forms. Probably once or twice.
Stone guy in class, a very strong-headed individual in school?
Average, I would say, in that regard. I wouldn't. I did. There is one particular experience. I think it might have been either in the third or fourth form. We were doing Latin, and the Latin teacher was Cecil Goodrich, who later became headmaster of the grammar school. And the practice was that when you were given homework to do, it was usually a piece to be translated. And I found it heavy going, so I remember having stayed up late one night trying to get through the Latin piece translation and only succeeded in doing half of the work that was set. And when we came to school and the class teacher began calling you around to translate a sentence and so forth. So, and then I am hoping and praying that I am called before the end of the paragraph where I had stopped and went to sleep. As it would happen, as the class progressed to exactly the spot where I stopped the night before, I was called to continue the translation. And I couldn't begin. So I and others who similarly could not do the translation was sent to the headmaster's office. The headmaster at the time, or the acting headmaster, was Mr. Medford. He himself was a Latin teacher, because that was more or less classical education. Probably everybody did Latin. So I said to him that I had, in fact, done my homework, but I just could not get the word to begin the next sentence. I had difficulty, so I couldn't start. So he says, "Are you sure?" He says, "Yes." So he opens the book and he begins at the beginning and he asks me to translate. So I began translating rather fluently, I thought. And when I got to the middle, he told me, "Stop, that's okay." And he sent me back to the classroom. So when I got in, the class teacher, Goodrich, said, "Savarin, sir, did the headmaster cane you?" I said, "No, sir. He sent me back to my class, sir." So now that class teacher, when he sends you to the headmaster, you are to be caned. That is why you're sent to the headmaster's office. Nobody likes to visit the headmaster's office. So he says to me, "Get out of my class." So I said to him, "Sir, the headmaster, sir, meaning your boss, asked me to get back to my class, sir." And I saw this guy began to get red. And he said to me, "Look, if I am to leave this classroom and go to the headmaster's office, you will be expelled." And so I very sheepishly picked up my books and left the classroom.
And you were not expelled?
Well, I was not sent back to the headmaster because what he wanted, since I had not been caned, then get out of his classroom.
Mm-hmm, so you get out nicely.
After trying a little thing and it didn't work, I walked out of the classroom.
Someone just said, Ted Sarah said, "I received his award." I'm not so sure if he's talking about your award. His award for Best Geography Student at Dominica Grammar School in 4th form. I went on to do a degree in geography at UE. So that is to say, Mr. Savarin, that you also gave the school some kind of award for geography.
For because I was a geography teacher. I taught geography for the 7 years that I taught at the grammar school. And I thought that I could make a contribution for the graduation class at the end of the year, and contributed towards awards and prizes which would be handed out to the children at the end of the year.
No, Mr. Savarin, so you are now a full-blown adolescent at the Dominica Grammar School.
Oh, I thought you meant now.
No, at the period, at the time.
At the time, yes.
You would have maybe stood up for a few students who, to a certain extent, you felt it was not given equal treatment like others. How did they look at you if you did that?
Well,
how did the teachers look at you if you did that?
What I became head boy of the class and a prefect in the senior classes, 5th and 6th form. But each class has a head boy. So you would try to be, and when the teacher was not in the classroom, you were in charge of the class. You maintained discipline and things of that nature. So you try to be as fair as possible. And if somebody sought to get somebody in trouble and you thought it wasn't fair, you would say, well, so this is not what happened. Actually, this is, and give an explanation so as not to get somebody into trouble if that person had not, in fact, transgressed in any way.
Now, the next thing I would like to find out, when you were through high school, what happened next?
I went to teaching. I was a 6th former in December, and in January I was a school teacher, assistant master at the grammar school.
And the subjects you taught?
Geography. I did English, which I liked very much, and mathematics, and some general science.
Okay. So you would have taught people like Donald Peters.
Yes, Donald Peters.
Hartley Adams.
People like Felix Gregoire, Dr. Mathurin, Dr. Moise, people like that.
How challenging they were at the time when you taught them?
Well, to be quite honest, I can't say that I had great difficulty with my students.
And so you would have done well with them in the process.
I thought we did fairly well. I was a little strict as a teacher, and I got the response in that guys did my work.
No. How long did you teach?
7 years.
7 years. When you were through teaching, what did you do next?
I had joined the Civil Service Association in 1966. A little before that, in 1965, I believe, and was elected General Secretary in 1966. At that time, the officers of the union were all voluntary, so I was General Secretary and a school teacher at the same time. So I sort of had 2 days work in one day. When we left school 8 to 1, so after lunch I went to the office of the union and worked late into the night in the union office. Did that for several years until the permanent, or rather what we call a full-time post of General Secretary was created.
What got you interested to be a member of the union? Why did you see the need to be a member of the union?
Well, the CSA had existed for some time and they were reorganizing themselves, and some of the staff had joined the union. So I joined because grammar school teachers, for some reason, were members of the Civil Service Association, while primary school teachers were members of the Dominica Teachers Union. So some of the grammar school teachers, having joined the CSA, and we were discussing that CSA membership in the staff room, and that it could possibly offer protection to you as an employee of the government, I decided I would join, but without any particular skill or experience or anything else in trade unionism.
No skill, no experience, but you'd have had to go through the laws of the employees.
No. You just joined. You didn't go through any laws.
No, I'm saying after you become the General Secretary,
yes,
you are now about working towards helping the members of yours to have a better living.
Well,
through salaries, the negotiations.
Having been elected General Secretary, your first task was to understand what this was all about, because it was my first time on the executive. My first experience on the executive was as General Secretary. So you then had to understand what it meant to be General Secretary of the Union, what was required of you, what were the regulations under which trade unions operated, and to make yourself familiar, almost an expert as it were, on industrial relations. I did a trade union course subsequently in the United Kingdom, which further enlightened and broadened my horizons in industrial relations, and took it from there.
And took it from there. It's 1966, came in situations in 1967, came in situations in 1970, then 1973.
Well, there were no real situations in 67, except, of course, we became an associated state of the Commonwealth of Dominica. And then the Constitution made provisions for the appropriate representative body to be designated for a body to be designated as the appropriate representative body to represent public officers. So I asked questions as to what exactly did that mean. I remember asking people like Lee Austin, who was Attorney General at the time, and the Chief Establishment Officer at the time, who was Webster Savarin. And they said, well, what it means is that if you, the CSA, is designated as the appropriate representative body, then you would be responsible for representing all civil servants on matters relating to conditions of service, employment, and things of that nature. So we applied to be recognized, and then received a letter from the administrator, the governor, because after associated status, we now had a governor, appointing the Civil Service Association as the appropriate representative body.
What would have been your concern just when we became an associated statehood from that of Britain? What was the concerns of the public officers, more or less, that you think that needed to be changed?
Well, we felt that we were now no longer, quote-unquote, colonial civil servants, and that we were employees of the state of Dominica, and that the government of the associated state, more than the government of the United Kingdom, was the authority that we were responsible to and with whom we interacted. So to speak, there was, you knew who your employer was, so to speak, as opposed to the fact that there was an administrator and then a governor who was the head of the council and had executive authority. And so it meant that it gave you a certain sense of pride that you were emerging. Because I remember, for instance, my first passport. I was described in that passport as a British subject citizen. Not a British citizen, not a British subject, but a British subject citizen. And that, of course, is certainly much different to being a British citizen. So the associate statehood now gave you citizenship of Dominica, which was an improved status. And then, of course, eventually you became an independent country, which changed everything.
At that time, what was the coat of arms?
The British coat of arms, God Save the Queen. I mean, when we didn't have, we recognized what we call Discovery Day, 3rd of November, which was the day that is identified as when Columbus sighted Dominica. So we observed that as Discovery Day. And then you had what was referred to as Empire Day, which children would parade, and you had games and things of that nature. So when you became an independent country, the 3rd of November was chosen as independence. So you no longer had Discovery Day, and you no longer observed Empire Day. So the activities which sort of took place for Discovery Day and Empire Day were merged into and enhanced for the observance of independence. And now this whole cultural program which we have, and all of the activities which take place, which I think is perhaps even a little unique in the Caribbean. We seem to make more, I believe, of the observance of independence than most of the other countries. Everybody has a parade, of course, but I think the whole cultural focus that we have on independence, I believe it is unique to us in Dominica.
By 1970, would you have had your eyes onto national politics?
Not at all. I was interested in politics because my aunt's husband was in local politics in Portsmouth. I was interested in the politics when I came in to Roseau, of the interplay between the DUPP and the Labour Party in Roseau, but did not see myself as a political animal at that time. I believe that my interest in politics arose out of the sort of conflicts between the government, that is to say, of the Associated State of Dominica, and the public service, the Civil Service Association, over conditions of service with salaries. And there was always this little tension. You made representation, you didn't get a response. So you held meetings and so on, and you sometimes got political flack from the platform at the fact that you were holding meetings and quote-unquote criticizing government. And so when you are attacked, certainly when I am attacked, I tend to respond. And one thing led to another.
Coming out from Portsmouth, at the time you would have known that Portsmouth would have been a very strong Labour stronghold. But in 1975, you ran against the Labour Party for the Freedom Party. But before I go there, I want to first speak of 1973.
Before you go there, in terms of Portsmouth, Portsmouth by 1975 had become a Labour Party stronghold. But when Robert Douglas represented Portsmouth as an independent, the Labour Party had not yet been formed. And when the Labour Party was formed, LeBlanc contested for, and there were 11 seats at the time, contested for the area that included Portsmouth and became the PAL rep. But within 2 years resigned to contest federal elections. And then the Labour Party introduced Earl Leslie as its candidate, who remained the Labour Party flag bearer until 1975.
Right, so let's go to 1973. 1973, you found yourself into a situation where you were a public officer.
That's right.
That must be coined. It must be said that you was a public officer working for the government of Dominica.
Absolutely.
But you were also a member of the Civil Service Association.
General Secretary.
And then you were also General Secretary. And you found yourself in the middle of fighting or representing, not fighting, but representing a public officer who worked at DBS Radio.
Well, yeah, that is a DBS story, so to speak. Daniel Corderon was program director here at, I don't think it was Radio Dominica, or it was Radio Dominica, not DBS.
No, it was Radio Dominica, yes.
No, Radio Dominica was a civil service, not a statutory corporation. It was part of the office of the Premier. So he ran these programs, and I think there was a program which he called Teenage Tempo on a Saturday morning. It was a sort of a call-in program. So young people played music and so on, and young people would call and express themselves and things of that nature. And a lot of the comments that were made there were critical of government. So the government of the day was not very happy. LeBlanc was premier and head of government. So we, in the development of the union, had created because there had been efforts and talk about the Trade Union Congress, but that was not making great headway. So we decided that we would have an intermediate arrangement, which we call the Joint Trade Union Working Committee of the 4 established unions at that time. And then we sort of entered into a relationship with the employers' organizations, that is to say, the Dominica Employers Federation, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Tourism Association, or the Hotel Association, I think it was called at the time. So we met once a month to discuss the general industrial relations climate, to discuss other things of importance to the economic activity in the country, so that the trade unions would understand the employer's point of view on various things, not necessarily competition or on negotiation, but just a dialogue. And the employers' organizations, both in tourism, commerce, and of course the Employers Federation, which is the trade union for employers, would have an opportunity to understand trade union concerns on matters, whether they be industrial relations matters or general developments in the society. So we were having one of those meetings on a Saturday, and some of the DBS employees came breathless to that meeting and wanted to speak to Savarin. We represented the public service, which included DBS, and informed me that they had walked off the job. I said, how do you mean you've walked off the job? Well, Daniel Cordero was transferred from DBS to the Sixth Form College as the clerk at the college. And we thought that that was victimization. So we walked off the job. I said, but I mean, you can't do that. He says, well, and they very excited. So since we were still in the process of building and developing the union, we decided, well, we would stand with the DBS workers and had a hurried meeting of the executive committee. And we decided that we would call on the rest of the public service to stand in solidarity with the staff at DBS and the Waterfront and Allied Workers Union on the Louis Benoit, Zaboka, the Amalgamated Workers Union on the Frederick Joseph, decided that they would give their full support to the CSA. And so we were drawn into a general strike in support of DBS. So after a couple of days of this general strike, the government declared a state of emergency and decided that people like myself as General Secretary, Ozzie Sims as Assistant Secretary, Maxime as President of the Union, and Louis Benoit as President of the WAU, who had called off the port workers on strike in support, were all placed under house arrest.
Is it by accident, because I want you to continue that story, is it by accident that all of the names that you called belonged as members of the Freedom Party? So would people then coin it to say that it was the Freedom Party colleagues or the Freedom Party supporters or members were the ones fending or pretending to fight for these workers to give their party some kind of credence?
Well, in 1973, the question of membership of the Freedom Party was not a matter that I was very concerned or aware of, or I believe that Zabokar was in fact a member of the Freedom Party, but that the Waterfront and Allied Workers Union was the most militant union in Dominica at that time.
Frederick Joseph was?
Frederick Joseph was DAO, Dominica Amalgamated.
But he was also part of the Freedom Party.
So his politics was not a matter of interest to me at that time. I was more concerned about developing the Public Service Union to be as effective a trade union as the WAWU was, as the DAO appeared to be, and as the other, the union, particularly the Public Service Union in Trinidad and the Public Service Union in Barbados was. And I thought that we could have been as effective as they were in giving representation to the public officers. There were lots of complaints in the public service, and we wrote a lot of letters to permanent secretaries and the chief establishment officer and the cabinet secretary and so on. We got some response, but not always satisfactory. So I was of the view that we were not being taken very seriously. And I thought, well, although we had not called the strike, we had not given notice of strike, we had not had any negotiations with anybody in an effort to resolve a particular matter. But the fact that the DBS staff had walked out, we decided that we would stand with them.
And when that happened, Mr. Savarin, did you all got paid?
Well, the strike prolonged for some 23 days. I met the union, that is to say, met with the premier and his cabinet. We discussed issues and tried to. The point that we made very forcefully was that since the position to which Corderon had been transferred was junior to the position that he held at DBS, that he was being disciplined without having been charged with an offense and without being given an opportunity to defend himself. He had just been summarily, as it were, punished. And we thought that that was against the general orders and the rules governing the public service, that the public officer has to be confronted or challenged or written to, pointing out what his transgressions were.
But if by any chance that the authority did not see that he had any transgression, but decided to transfer him on the merit of his eloquence on radio to the classroom, was anything wrong at that?
Because he was transferred to a junior position.
Okay, so that's...
Whenever you move a person from a senior position to a junior position, it is punishment.
Okay.
And you cannot administer punishment to a public officer unless he has been charged with an offense.
Salaries were deferred?
No, but
remained?
Yes, but there's a thing called constructive punishment. And if you are moved from performing in a senior position to performing in a very junior position, it is clearly the imposition of sanctions as a result of displeasure on you. And I remember in the discussions that we held that the premier said to us, well, when all of this is finished, the only person who will have a job is Daniel Corderon. So what happened was that Corderon was then transferred from the Sixth Form College as a senior clerk to the establishment department as a senior executive officer. Now, the senior executive officer was one increment higher than the position of program director. So by that move, our argument that he was being disciplined was taken away from us because you could say that he was promoted. But we had wanted him reinstated at DBS. That was what we were calling for. But when he was now moved to establishment as senior executive officer, which was technically a higher position, that argument lost, and we decided that we would end the strike. So there was a lot of negotiations and so forth. And the question of pay came up. And I remember one of the permanent secretaries saying to me, well, you see, this is not a question of right or wrong. This is a question of relative position of influence. So in other words, what he was saying to us is that we were at a disadvantage. And I remember everybody receiving a letter from the Public Service Commission saying deduct and reprimand, which means that this was the only reprimand I ever received in the public service. And we lost 23 days' pay.
Oh, you did not. You were not paid.
Not paid for the days that we run strike. We lost 23 days' pay.
But you got. But you had your position. You had your job.
Yes. Nobody's job. Nobody lost the job.
Okay.
Absolutely nobody lost the job, but they lost 3 weeks' pay.
Someone said, Kelvin Baffrit said, there was a slogan, no Papadi, no 595 was the call.
Well, yes. I mean, we had a couple demonstrations and things of that nature and so on. But because the call was for his reinstatement in his former position, on the basis that he had been demoted without having been given an opportunity to defend himself. But then you don't have to defend yourself if you're promoted. So when he was moved into the establishment department as a senior executive officer, which was 1 point higher than that of program director, the argument that he had been disciplined in any way was taken away. That was a very astute move, I believe, by the government and by LeBlanc.
No. 73 is gone. 74, preparation of increase in salaries for public officers. 121% increase in salaries.
Well, that was always something that was misunderstood and formed a lot of propaganda. 121% for those at the bottom of the scale, and 60 or so percent for those at the top of the scale. So the government, the permanent secretaries jumped on the 121% and accused the union of being irresponsible. But people were being paid 50 cents an hour, men, that is to say laborers, and 36 cents an hour female. So 100 asking, I think we at that level we wanted 150% at the bottom. But that would just bring you to something like $1.25. So $1.25 an hour, really we did not think that was exorbitant, because we thought that 50 cents for an hour's work and 36 cents if you were a woman was just not cutting it. So although the whole propaganda was that we wanted 100, we in fact got 121% at the bottom. But the propaganda was that we were demanding 150%, as if we were asking for 150% across the board, and that was never the case.
The 121%, was it for 3-year period or for 1 year? How was the breakdown of that 121?
Well, the Industrial Relations Act, which is the provisions that govern us as a registered trade union, provides that collective agreements are for a maximum period of 3 years. So that would apply for 1974, 1975, 1976. And we would have been entitled to make a request for a new collective agreement in 1977, as of January 1977.
So, so you got that 121% across the board.
No, we got 100
for the below
at the minimum.
At the minimum.
Yes.
And the 60+% that you requested, what did you receive?
I think we got something like 40 or 45% at the top.
Did it at that time? Did it create any inflation that increase for the public officers? I should have asked first, how many public officers at that time?
It was certainly smaller than the public service is today. There may have been about 1,500. That would include teachers, nurses, firemen, everybody.
Okay, so there was no reason to think of any inflation to the country's economy.
Well, you have to understand the trade union represents, like any lawyer, its clients, in this case, its members. So it does not raise the arguments that the other side would raise. So the question of ability to pay and impact on the economy, that would be the argument of the employer. But we were able to convince the employer that there was justification in the recommendations that we were making for adjusting the salaries of public officers.
Then we would have seen in 1977, sir, rising prices of oil. We would have seen that in 1977 thereabout.
No, but we are in 1973, 74.
74.
We are in 1974.
You spoke about the 3-year negotiation.
So 3 years, so by 1977.
Right, so I'm talking about 1977. So you got your increase in 74, 75, 76.
The part of the amusing part, if you want, in retrospect, was that in November of 74, thereabouts, we were in serious negotiations to try to bring the negotiations to an end. And Premier LeBlanc, when we sort of concluded the negotiations in November, says, so that I asked the question, well, when will we be paid? So he said, well, we'll be paid in December. So when December came, and there was no move to pay the increase, so we wrote to ask, well, what is happening? And the Premier responded, well, he said December, but he didn't say December of which year. So all of 75 passed. And then in 76, we decided, well, look, enough was enough. And we went on strike to get the implementation of the salaries that we had negotiated in 1974. Then probably your question of inflation and all of that comes into consideration then.
Because you have gotten back pay.
Well, we did not get the back pay in 76. As a way of bringing the strike to an end, we agreed that the new salaries would be implemented as of the 1st of July, 76. And the arrears would be paid subsequently. So we got the new salaries paid without back pay.
The union accept?
No, the back pay would be paid subsequently.
Okay.
And when all of 76 concluded, and 77 was upon us, and the back pay was not paid, we then went on strike for the back pay, which was now 30 months, that is to say from January of 1974 to June of 1976, 2.5 years of back pay.
By that time, there's no E.O. LeBlanc, there's no Patrick John.
By that time, there was Patrick John. There was no E.O. LeBlanc.
Right. So there was no E.O. LeBlanc, but there was Patrick John.
There was Patrick John.
So what, in reference to the arrangement of E.O. LeBlanc, would have been met by Patrick John?
Well, remember, you negotiate with the employer, so it doesn't matter who the Prime Minister or the Premier or whatever the case may be, who is in office. You have an arrangement with the government.
The reason why I said that, because you said to me that E.O. LeBlanc indicated when you would have gotten the money.
Yes,
so
because
we
signed the agreement with LeBlanc.
Right, LeBlanc administration.
With LeBlanc as the head of government in 1974.
Mm-hmm.
But then he did not, it is true, from our understanding, we expected to be paid by December 74. That didn't happen.
That didn't happen.
Right.
Then comes a new premier.
Yes, but
who has to, as the employer,
right.
who has to also negotiate with his employees.
No.
In terms of the negotiation for the
Who is an employer that has inherited a contract, an industrial relations contract between his employees and the government that he leads.
So you're saying that Patrick John had to agree upon what the Libla administration approved on.
He was the
from
government.
From the negotiation.
He was the government. The agreement is with the government. The agreement is not with the prime minister in his person. It is the prime minister as the representative of the government. So it is the government of which you have the contract. For instance, you're a civil servant. If the government that employed you loses an election, you're still employed. You're employed by the government. You're not employed by a particular political party or leader of a political party. You're an employee of the state. And the political party is merely a representative of the state, but the arrangement is with the state.
Because by then in 75, there would have been an election. So there would have been a new administration.
There was an election in 1975, and there was talk of giving a bonus, probably as a way of getting civil servants to forget that there was a contract that had been signed. We were opposed to the bonus, but I think the bonus was paid nevertheless. But we said, well, that has nothing to do with the contract which was signed.
But what type of bonus was it given
I think
as a percentage?
Probably a month's pay. So I presume you got for that year an extra month's pay.
Okay. Now, so here we are now in 77.
Right.
We're talking about the whole issue, as I said earlier on, about inflation.
Right.
And more negotiations have to continue for increase in salaries.
Well, the first the negotiations or the exchange which was held was for the payment of the arrears in pay which was owed, which was a debt. As part of the agreement to settle that debt, we agreed that we would not make an application for the year 1977 because this payment was now being made in 1977. So we said, well, we would allow the agreement, as it were, to cover 4 years instead of 3 years, as is provided for in the Industrial Relations Act.
No, here it is. In 1975, you went up for the Freedom Party in the Portsmouth constituency.
That is not true. In 1975, I contested as an independent.
Oh, as an independent. I'm frightened. Okay, but from what I learned, that you got the backing of at the time, Mary Junior Charles, of the Freedom Party, leader of the Dominica Freedom Party.
Yes, the Freedom Party did not have a candidate in the election of 75 in Portsmouth. So the supporters of the Freedom Party were persuaded that they should vote for me.
So behind the scenes, didn't someone say to you, I think you're a very good candidate, you have a very good profile. The Freedom Party is not a very popular party in the Portsmouth constituency, so go behind the scenes and we will support you?
No, that was my decision. I was not, as it were, set up or... as a matter of fact, I will tell you this. I was of the view that it was unlikely that the Freedom Party would win an election under Eugenia Charles. I was of that view in 1975. So when I contested the election, I sought to persuade a number of other persons that they would want to contest as independents. So I think in that year, there were more independent candidates than at any other time in the history of Dominica. You had Conrad Cyrus as an independent candidate. You had Pat Stevens as an independent candidate. You had Jenna Amo as an independent candidate. You had Frederick Joseph as an independent candidate. You had Alfred as an independent candidate. So what we sought to do was independent candidates sought to support one another. We never appeared on any party political platform.
Is it that you all went as independent candidates? You rightly said that you did not see H.E Charles becoming or winning an election, but behind the scenes that every one of you all gave support to the Freedom Party, because if you look at it, Jenna Armour ran for the Freedom Party 5 years later.
But
Charles Savarin,
you are running against an incumbent, and the incumbent was the Labour Party. For instance, in Portsmouth, Leslie had been, and then Michael Douglas replaced him as the candidate. I believe in the Paybush area, Banis was the Labour Party candidate. So if you're running against the incumbent, whoever the incumbent happens to be.
No. You are saying that, but I am of the view that you're not only running against an incumbent, but you have an ideology, you have a belief for reasoning for running. And
my belief for running was that I felt that I, as an individual, could do more for Portsmouth than the Labour Party.
Isn't that a myth? Isn't that a myth by anyone to think that as an independent candidate that you can do so much more than a person who is within a political framework, political party?
No, that is because at the end of the day, it is the individual who is the parliamentary representative, and the representation that you get in a constituency has to do with who your parliamentary representative is. Because within a party, within any structure, within a government even, there is, you have to compete with your fellow party members for development in your constituency. You have to seek to show that certain developments are a greater priority in your constituency than in the other constituency, as it were, because there is never enough resources to do everything that any government wants to do. So you always have to prioritize. And even within an existing party, you are in competition with the other members of your party. Now, the government has a responsibility for the country. The government is responsible for constituencies represented by members of the governing party. The government is also responsible for the development in constituencies represented by members of the opposition party. So you have got, for instance, let us take the situation as it is today. We've just built a brand new hospital in Marigot. That is because the government as a government, not looking at whether we have a parliamentary representative of the Labour Party from Marigot or not, recognizes the need for modern health services in the northeastern part of the country. So you take a decision as a government on the needs of the country, and in terms of geographic location, it has to be based on that. Now, if you are within the government, you are in the area where decisions are made. But if you're not in the government, you nevertheless have to be able to make forceful representation in and out of Parliament to show the justification for certain investments to be made in your constituency.
Oh, here comes you are still the CSA General Secretary.
That's right.
And you just ran a vicious election.
That's right.
2 years later, 77, you are now negotiating again with a government.
That is correct.
For increasing salaries.
That is correct.
The government, through the negotiation, there was a stalemate, I believe.
The negotiations for increasing salary did not take place in 1977. The discussions in 1977 was for the implementation of the debt owed to the public servants for retroactive pay from January of 1974. The negotiations then began in 1978 for increases to take effect from January 1978.
But we know that in 1977,
right,
the public officers were not very happy. And so they took to the streets. They had strikes for 47 days.
The 47-day strike was in 1977, yes.
Right, 1977, right.
Yes.
Tell us, give us a somewhat of a background of how that began, because there are people who are giving their own story. You know, I have the man, he's still alive, thanks God. I can have conversation with him about 1977. Tell us what actually transpired in 1977.
Well, when there was no progress in getting the retroactive pay or the back pay paid, we served notice that if the matter was not resolved by a certain date, we would go on strike. The matter was not resolved. The Industrial Relations Act provides that before any strike action takes place, that the union is to declare a dispute to the minister responsible for labor. And there is to be a period, I believe, of either 21 or 30 days, within which the minister would seek to find a solution between the employer and the employee, or the employee's representative, for the particular matter. In other words, the period of time would be to avoid taking industrial action if the matter can be settled. There was no effort to settle the matter during the period of notice, and therefore, when the notice expired, we went on strike. And that strike lasted for 47 days. And then the government agreed that it would pay.
But in the 47 days of strike,
right,
didn't the union by any chance look at the status of the world economy and looking at what inflation was actually how it was affecting Dominica? Did the union, in its process of fighting for the workers, did they take that into consideration and would have decided to cut
forgo the debt?
No, not forgo the debt. No, I'm not about forgoing the debt. You owe someone, you got to pay. All right. I'm saying in reference to the number of days that you would have gone on the strike. The union.
But you don't determine at the beginning how many days a strike is going to last for. You go on strike until the matter is resolved.
But isn't there a tribunal if you cannot?
The tribunals are not automatic. The tribunal has to be appointed by the government,
by the minister.
Now, the minister appoints a tribunal in an effort, as it were, to hear the case, so to speak, and to determine the rights and wrongs of the case.
Did that ever happen?
Not to my knowledge, because the point of the matter is, if you owe a person, you see, if you are negotiating and there is no arrangement, the tribunal can seek perhaps to get you to agree at a compromise. But if you have a contract that is signed but not implemented, the tribunal cannot say that you are not to implement the contract that is signed. So really, there's very little that a tribunal can do in a situation where you have a contract which is signed but not implemented.
I just want to answer someone on Facebook there. The person said that you should just ask straightforward questions and let Mr. Charles Savarin answer, not ask a question with a story and is wrong information. I'm not giving any wrong information. I'm asking questions, and based on the information that I would have gotten in those days, Mr. Savarin.
If you give wrong information, I will correct you.
You'll correct me. So I have not been corrected yet. I'm asking the questions that I knew. So is it wrong to say that there were 47 days? No. Is it wrong to say that there was no tribunal? No, I'm not wrong. So that's why I asked the question. I asked because I knew that there was no tribunal. And coming back now to our subject matter, Mr. Savarin, in reference to the 47 days,
yes,
I know that you all would have gotten support from the farmers and support
we had support for around a cross section of the society. First of all, the trade unions, the other trade unions, supported us. Because there was implications for them as well. If the government will not honor an industrial agreement, why would the private sector honor an industrial agreement? So from the private sector trade unions' point of view, it was important that government as an employer would honor agreements made with the union representing its employees. Because if that were not so, then the example set by government in the public service, employers in the private sector would point fingers and said, well, look, the government signed an agreement, but they didn't pay, so why should we pay?
Is it a mistake, Mr. Savarin, in 1973 that you had, we called a few names earlier on, Joseph, Zabuka, Louis Benoit,
right.
Your group, that is the CSA. In 73, now in 77, the same group decided to come together. Is it a mistake, or they're just giving solidarity? Because earlier on you made mention that there was a struggle to set up a trade union congress.
A trade union congress is a formal organization. There are rules governing a trade union congress. And we were never able to agree. There were also other factors at play. There was the fact, for instance, that the different unions in Dominica were associated to different international organizations that had their own differences. So that the question of a trade union congress, which had members or associates of an international organization that had differences with another international organization, became a little problematic. And also personalities came into play as to who would lead the organization, who would not lead, and so on. So all of these things. So not having been able to resolve that, and seeing the necessity for cooperation among trade unions, nevertheless, we formed an informal organization, which we call the Joint Trade Union Working Committee, so that we would meet and discuss industrial relations matters, and we could provide support for one another if and when such support was called for.
So in 77, everything was settled, payment was made.
Correct.
And you moved forward.
Absolutely.
Right. What happened in 79?
Well, in 1979, remember, negotiations began in 1978, and the collective agreement is supposed to cover the period 78, 79, 80. Now, you usually want to bring your industrial agreement into effect on the back of the old agreement. So ideally, you would want to have an agreement which would take effect on the 1st of January 1978. But here we were in 78 negotiating, and here we were in 79 still negotiating. So we again declared a dispute, this time to bring the agreement, to bring the negotiations to an end. So we declared a dispute, and we gave notice of strike action, which would take place at the end of May. Now, recalling what happened in 1977, the government of the day, that is the Patrick John government, decided that they would go to the parliament to introduce measures to make strike action in the public service illegal. At that time also, there was tremendous criticism of the government in the media, particularly the newspapers, the Chronicle. And therefore, the government decided that they would take the opportunity to go to Parliament and also to introduce legislation to impose restrictions on the newspaper, on the media, on the press.
But so, I read, sorry, Mr. Savarin, but I read from the Hansard saying something totally different.
What did you read?
I'm trying to just recollect, because I've discussed that before, where they indicated that what they were trying to do is to allow people, whenever they speak, to be able to write their names, because they were writing information in the papers and not putting the names on the document, and so the newspaper would have been the one that they would have sued if they had to do any suing. And so the Attorney General at the time, Leo Austin, and I think the Minister of Home Affairs were the ones who tabled the information to Parliament.
Right.
And it is not like, as many people are saying, from what I read from the Hansard, it is totally different from what has been said by many people.
Well, no, you read what the government said, which is totally, you know, in any matter, you have to hear both sides of the story. If the government is introducing a piece of legislation which is controversial, of course, the government will seek to sugarcoat in its presentation and to justify the measure that it is introducing. The effect, however, was that if a criticism or a comment critical of the government was published anonymously, the government would, by passing the law, would give itself the power to demand that the newspaper disclose the name, the author submitting the article. And should the only critical of government, not critical of other persons, critical of government, and should the newspaper fail or refuse to disclose the identity of the person contributing.
If I remember, Mrs. Savarin, sorry to cut you, in reference to that same matter,
yes.
it did not state in what I read from the Hansard, it did not state government. It says that anyone who publishes an information
critical of government,
critical that cannot substantiate
critical of government. Read again.
I'll read it again.
Read again.
I'll read it in the morning.
Critical of government.
Mm-hmm.
And so
because they gave examples of many other countries in the region who was at that time implementing that same kind of. Antigua was one of the countries that in the Hansard that I read, they spoke about Antigua. They spoke about, I think, St. Lucia.
I can't.
I'm just telling you what I read
as I said, I mean, if you're making your case.
No, I'm not making a case. I'm just saying what I read.
Not you, the government.
Okay.
If one is making a case, you seek, of course, to raise arguments in support of your particular position.
Okay.
The fact of the matter is that to make it punishable, to not to disclose the identity. No, you're in the media business. one of the cardinal points of journalism is that you never disclose your source.
That's correct.
Right. So, if you now go and you have introduced legislation which seeks to make it mandatory that you disclose your source, and if you fail to disclose the source, then you can be fined and imprisoned, then that is a significant encroachment on the fundamental rights of freedom of expression. Now, the Chronicle of the day was owned and operated by a private company, I think Management Consultants. It had earlier been owned by the Catholic Church, but it had been taken over by Management Consultants. The most private sector organizations felt that was in fact an attack on the media, therefore on the private sector who owned the media. So they opposed the amendment to the slander and libel ordinance, which was where that provision was being made. And at the same time, there was an amendment to the Industrial Relations Act, which sought to make it illegal for civil servants to go on strike, and also to make it illegal for anybody to support civil servants who were on strike by penalties, fines, and imprisonment. Now, these two things were scheduled to be taken in Parliament on the 29th of May.
In the schedule, Mr. Savarin, because I read this thing attentive. I read it attentively, and in reference to the issues of imprisonment,
right?
I did not get it clear as to whether it's an offense. I think in a passage, when politicians see a mic and they talk, and guys say, well, if you don't do what you have to do, you'll go in prison. Blah, blah, blah.
No. You must read the act.
Okay.
You must read the act itself, because
hasn't the act been amended?
It no longer applies.
Right.
Under the penalties provisions of the act, it makes provisions to fine and confine anybody who organizes a strike, so any officers of the union. It makes provisions to fine and confine anybody who participates in the strike. And it makes provisions to fine and confine anybody who supports a public officer who goes on strike.
I read that part for sure. That I read.
So these two pieces of legislation taken together were seen as an encroachment on the right to organize and the freedom of association. And the amendment to the slander and libel ordinance was taken as an affront on the fundamental rights of the freedom of expression. So the trade unions and the private sector in Dominica came together, and on the 28th of May held a major meeting in Lagon, Roseau. And while the meeting was taking place, news came to us. Well, the meeting was organized by the trade unions and private sector organizations together. And Zaboka, the president of the workers, the port workers trade union, the WAWU, Waterfront and Allied Workers Union, was the chairman of the meeting. So news came to us at the DTU office that Patrick John was having a meeting at the Goodwill School and or the Goodwill Parish Hall, in one of those two centers anyhow. And among the things that was being discussed was the declaration of a state of emergency and a ban on demonstrations, because we were planning to demonstrate outside the parliament, which at that time met on the 4th floor of government headquarters.
Would you first have to seek the permission to have the demonstration?
We wrote to the police.
Did the police give you any permission?
Yes.
They gave you?
Yes.
Okay.
So we wrote to the police, and the So the news came to us that the government and its supporters were planning to declare a state of emergency on the 29th.
Not the supporters. The supporters cannot declare that.
Well,
the government.
Well, in discussion with, and then you have the cheerleaders and so on.
Okay.
Fix them up. And
they will support. They will
take
support.
care of Savarin and them.
Yeah, they'll support. They'll give support. But they can't. They can't give permission.
No. But you go in a forum of your supporters and you begin to say how you're going to deal with those guys tomorrow and you're going to do this state of emergency and so on. Yeah, that type of stuff. So you feel strengthened and emboldened because you know your people have your back. So Zaboka put the matter to the meeting. He says, well, look, we've just got word that the government is going to declare a state of emergency and is going to issue a proclamation banning demonstrations. Are we going to demonstrate tomorrow? Yes. So whether there's a state of emergency or not, yes. So the meeting resolved that our demonstration will go on because we are opposed to the two pieces of legislation.
But any chance before that meeting of that night, did Louis Benoit Zaboka had a conversation with Patrick John, Premier?
I don't know. I know Louis and Patrick were friends. I mean, Patrick had been a member of the Waterfront and Allied Workers Union before he became Prime Minister of Dominica. So I don't know what went on between Patrick and Louis Benoit. But it would not surprise me if they spoke. I mean, they were both WAU officers. They knew each other very well. So
because Patrick came from the WAU as General Secretary himself.
That is correct. In
'69.
Yes. So I wouldn't know what transpired between them. But it would not surprise me if they had discussions. I mean, but I wouldn't know. I was not privy. I was not told. I was not aware. But it would not surprise me.
Is it because some circles are saying that the Freedom Party orchestrated the demonstration and not necessarily that of the union? How factual?
I would find that very difficult to believe. How would the Freedom Party orchestrate the demonstration?
Well, you hear that from circles. I'm sure that you have heard that yourself.
No, people say all sorts of things, but the question, what mechanism would the Freedom Party use? I mean, the fact of the matter, the laws were drafted by the government. I don't think the Freedom Party would have had a hand in drafting the laws. From
what I gathered, I'm not saying that what I'm saying is correct, but from discussion with several people in different circles.
Which circles?
Different circles.
No. But even today, if you speak to people in certain circles, you get one point of view of the
same
today,
issue.
And if you speak to other persons, you get a different point of view of the events unfolding today.
Because it was said that Dominica would have been independent in the year 1977. It delayed 1 year by virtue of all of the situations, industrial situations and unrest that happened during that period.
I'm not aware that there was any relationship between, say, trade union activity and the date for election.
No, creating not elections, independence.
And the date for independence. I am
creating the link, and showing the value as to why. I said certain circles would have said.
The question. Remember, there were fundamental differences between the government of Patrick John and the opposition under H.E Charles. In the negotiations of the Constitution for independence. I think there was an Article 56.3 or something of the other that there was violent, vehement difference on. And I think it took some time to agree to the changes which would make it acceptable to both the government and the opposition.
So let's go a little bit to the independence. Although we're going very well in terms of the order of how things happen in the industrial unrest that happened in Dominica during that period. In reference to independence,
yes,
it has been said that you can help to...
No, please, go ahead.
It is said that H.E Charles, who then was the opposition leader, was asking for a referendum over that of requesting of the British to just give us independence.
Well, as you are aware, the constitutions in the Eastern Caribbean states make provisions for constitutional change or change of status. For instance, if you take the question of the CCJ, generally speaking, most of the constitutions make it necessary, have a requirement for there to be a referendum on the change from the Privy Council as the final court of appeal to the CCJ. Now, these constitutions are not identical. They are similar, but they're not identical. In the case of Dominica, it was not necessary under the Constitution to have a referendum. What you required was to have the agreement of the British government, and then you could move from the Privy Council to the CCJ. In, I believe, Grenada and quite possibly St. Vincent, I think the situation...
Basically, for me, where there are governor generals...
No, it has nothing to do with governors general. It just has to do with the letter, the particular wording of the Constitution. It's nothing to do with governors general. I mean, it is true that when we became independent, we opted for a Republican Constitution, and therefore we had a president on the first day of our independence.
And so it provides us in terms of Parliament to have a 2/3 majority. Our Constitution makes that very clear.
So you have a qualified majority.
Right. So we have a qualified majority compared to that of the countries that are under Governor General.
No.
No.
That has nothing
to do
with whether you have a Governor General or you do not have a Governor General. It just has to do with the provisions of the Constitution. In some of these constitutions, you need both a qualified majority in Parliament, and having got the qualified majority in Parliament, you then submit the matter to the people at large by way of a referendum. In our constitution, you have the qualified majority in Parliament, and that authorizes you now to negotiate with the British government the transfer of your final court from the Privy Council to the CCJ. So there is no need under the provisions of our Constitution for there to be a referendum in that regard. So it just has to do with the letter. It has nothing to do with whether or not
you are a Republican.
You have a
Republican state
constitution or a monarchy.
Okay.
That is to say, a Governor General representing the monarch of the United Kingdom.
Okay. As we were speaking about independence of 78,
right.
What was the views of the Freedom Party at the time? You would have been associated with the Freedom Party
but
at
not
the time.
a member.
Not a member, but associated with them.
And you see, you have got to understand that my relationship with H.E Charles was because she was my lawyer. And she also became the lawyer for the Civil Service Association. So that, for instance, in the 1973 state of emergency, when we went to court, she was one of the lawyers representing the union in that case. So I had that relationship with her. Not a relationship with the Freedom Party, because she ran her office as a lawyer, and I am sure that there were a lot of people who were Liberites and belonged to no party at all, who she represented as their attorney. And plus, of course, she represented my father when he needed legal representation and things of that nature. So that is where the relationship came from.
No, Mr. Savarin, as we speak about 79, we were speaking earlier about 79.
Yes.
So here goes this situation with the unconstitutional, how would I call it, unconstitutional move away or getting away of the government.
I'm not quite sure that I follow you.
Okay.
Because as far as I'm aware, there was nothing unconstitutional which happened in 1979. In fact, what happened in 1979 was intended to preserve the Constitution and the provisions of the Constitution for freedom of association and freedom of expression, the fundamental rights and freedoms guaranteed in the Constitution. So there was nothing that unless you can point out to me, there was nothing unconstitutional that transpired in 1979. The Constitution of Dominica remained and has never been suspended since independence.
The Constitution was not suspended, but Mr. Savarin, we know that there was you help me with the name that you all formed.
The Committee of National Salvation.
Committee of National Salvation, right?
That is correct.
What was the legality of that committee?
Oh, it was not a committee that is based on the law. It was a committee just as the Joint Trade Union Working Committee is not a committee that is provided for in law. It is just that there was a commonality of interests, and persons representing those interests came together in an effort to manage a very difficult situation in the country. So it is not that there is a law or a provision of the Constitution that makes provisions for a Committee of National Salvation.
So what give the committee the power to decide and to elect ministers and prime minister?
You have a fundamental misunderstanding of what in fact transpired. You had a situation where the country was virtually at a standstill. There was a general strike, and that general strike was not only supported by all of the trade unions, it was also supported by the private sector and private sector organizations. The port was closed, goods were not coming in and going out except for bananas and things of that nature. So the persons who were at the leadership of the organizations that were involved created a forum where they could meet and discuss the issues and seek to find a solution. And that forum was called the Committee of National Salvation. The mandate and the purpose of that committee was to hold consultations in an effort to arrive at a workable solution to the difficulties and the impasse that existed in the country at the time.
But while you're saying that, Mr. Savarin, I can understand your point of view, but I can understand from the layman's point of view that the Committee for National Salvation was not a constitutional organization.
There are, well, I mean, I don't understand what you mean.
For people to be given the mandate to run a government, we know from the democratic point of view that election must be. The president must be present, and the president must be able to get the majority from the winning side to determine who is the prime minister. We know from the National Salvation that did not happen.
Well, I don't know that what you know at all, because
from the Hansard, what you
know and what actually happened.
No, from the Hansard, Eustace, this guy who was the parliamentary representative, Eustace Francis, tabled something that came from you in terms of the election, or not the election, but the how would I say it? Yes, the election of the prime minister from within the elected members in Parliament.
What transpires in Parliament is the business of Parliament. In other words, if you are and you hold a responsible position, wherever it is, and you are responsible for decisions that you make, you may seek advice, you may take advice, but the decision is yours. Similarly, you have an impasse. The Committee for National Salvation, first of all, what transpired was that ministers of government, after the Defence Force had opened fire and shot and killed Philip Timothy, and 11 other persons were injured by gunshot from the Defence Force.
But Mr.
On
Savarin,
the 29th of May.
But Mr. Savarin, I have read a document that was requested of the Freedom Party then to do an inquiry on the matter of May 29th and the shooting of Philip Timothy.
Yes.
And the document that I've read it to the public here already, has indicated very clearly that the Defence Forces did not kill Julius Timothy.
Well, I don't know if there is
the
any
autopsy that was carried on Philip Timothy said that very clearly.
Well, it may have said, and I don't have it in front of me, that the Philip Timothy was not shot by the firearms issued to the Defence Force. Now, a lot of particularly the officers of the Defence Force, had personal firearms which they carried with them.
Can we say the public also had their own personal firearms?
As there are firearms now in the public.
No. I'm talking about 79. Can we also say that if you are saying that the Defence Forces had firearms?
I am saying that I am aware. I know for a fact. I know.
How would you have known that as a fact?
Well, I know
people would have said so to you, maybe, right?
I actually saw firearms in pistols in the hands of officers, and I happen to know as well that these were not issued by the Defence Force.
So I'm asking you the question: would there be private citizens in and among the crowd with their private firearms?
There may very well have been. They may very well have been. I mean. Even in Dominica today, you see a crowd of people you do not know who has or who does not have a firearm. We know that there are illegal firearms in the possession of private citizens in Dominica, and there are also licensed firearms in the possession of persons in the public. With regards to Philip Timothy, just as in the case in 1980, I believe it was, when in December there was this attack on the police station, and the police guard was shot and killed by one of the former members of the Defence Force who entered the police station and also shot at the chief of police. To determine which firearm cause the death or injury of a person, you need two things.
But by that time, would they Defence Forces by that time?
No, you're talking about the attempted coup.
Yes,
No, they were former. At that time, they were former.
Right. So
by virtue,
by virtue that they have, because you're trying to analyze it by indicating that in 80 that they had this scuffle with the police,
right.
And by so they had private firearms.
No, but you can only determine whether a bullet which causes death or injury was discharged from a particular firearm by recovering both the bullet and the firearm. And then you do the forensics on both. So
that was also done because from the report it gave all the number of ammunition that would have been at the barracks of both the police and that of the Defence Forces, and they could account for every one of them.
No. They could not account for every one of them. I think you want to read again.
I would want to read again.
You want to read again.
Okay. Subject to correction.
No, you just want to read again.
All right. But the point is, Mr. Savarin, I have, as I said, a document, and I think you would have read that same document, that indicated that Philip Timothy was not shot by the defense force.
No, it doesn't say that. It says it was not shot
by the ammunition of the
firearms issued
by the defense forces. Thank you for the correction. Yeah.
Right. So the point that I'm making is that there were members of the defense force with private firearms, which would not be firearms issued by the defense force.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
so now to be able to determine which firearm caused the death of Philip Timothy, you'd have to recover the firearm and recover the bullet, and then be able to match the bullet to the firearm. So then you can say conclusively, this is the firearm that caused the death of the particular person.
And so I would not put the blame solely, as you'd want to put it, to the defense forces. That's why I asked the question.
I am satisfied. I don't know where you were on the 29th of May.
I was you know where this shop, Ma Allen shop is? You remember that lady Ma Allen on Kennedy Avenue?
On Kennedy Avenue.
Yeah, right, yes. Opposite the ministerial building.
Yes, but
myself and this guy H.E.
Yes.
I'll never forget that we will stand.
But the shots were being fired not in your direction, but in the opposite direction.
Where I was when I heard the first shot, I was not far from where the first shot in terms came from. So you know where the piper Brother Jimin was?
Yes.
I was in that area there, right there.
That area.
Right. When they turned over the vehicles of the Prime Minister, the green vehicle, when they were shaking up the
I don't know that they turned over.
No, well, not turned over. Sorry. Not I used the wrong term.
Of course.
When they were rocking.
When
they were rocking the green vehicle of the Prime Minister, with the attempt to overturn it.
But I don't know that there was an attempt to overturn it.
No, I'm saying based on what I saw. You do not know what I saw.
No, but I know the vehicle was rocked.
Yes.
And I also know that the defense force approached along Kennedy Avenue and first used tear gas and then used live ammunition.
Repeat that again.
I know that the defense force approached along Kennedy Avenue, discharged tear gas, and then used live ammunition.
I think you need to read the report all over again.
What is it that the report says?
I just said just read the report.
No. I can tell you when you say something that is wrong. So if I said something that is wrong, you should tell me that the report says.
As a matter of fact, I
did not.
I read in the report, and I also had an interview with the defense force who was on duty that day.
Right.
When he got on Kennedy Avenue, close to where there's no, I think Caroline's restaurant.
Somewhere there.
Yeah, the guy, the defense forces said to me that he got a stone was spelt at him. And his name is Vincent. What? I'm trying to remember his last name, but he lives in Bath State. I had an interview with him right here, and he said what transpired that morning, that they got the first attack of stones.
But that is absolutely not true.
I'm just telling you what.
I heard what you say, but I'm saying to you that is absolutely not true.
Mm-hmm.
The defense force approached a government headquarters along Kennedy Avenue. They disembarked and they unfurled a banner that says, "Disperse or we will use smoke."
Mm-hmm. Then
they proceeded to discharge tear gas at the crowd.
Uh-huh.
The police, who had been there for probably an hour maintaining order, were caught with the tear gas just as the demonstrators were and ran for cover.
Would I be wrong to say that maybe the night before that stones were gathered in the areas of Pong and Bath Road?
That may very well be so. I cannot say that it was or it was not. So I am not in a position to say that stones were not gathered, so that may very well be so.
You're very.
But I will say to you that no stones were thrown before the police, the defense force, fired tear gas and then live bullets.
What I can say, no, I didn't say live bullets after. What I can say, Mr. Savarin, is that you couldn't have been everywhere at the time.
No. But from where I was, no stones were thrown.
Or where you were. That is totally different. That's totally different from the event. That is totally different from the actual event.
No, I was there on the ground. The defense force came up Kennedy Avenue. I saw the banner unfold. I saw tear gas being fired at the crowd.
The banner unfolded by the cinema area there.
Before you got to the
just
cinema.
Before you get to the cinema, right?
Yes, before you got to the cinema.
Right, and
that is before you got to the Arawak.
Before you get to
after you left Lago, after you left the intersection, coming up, so you could say midway between the intersection and the Caribs and the Arawak cinema. They unfold their banner, said to disperse or we will use smoke. And then they proceeded to fire tear gas.
And then we saw that a government, if I can say a government, for 12 months. Well, actually, it was said that a government for just 6 months.
About that.
And it went for a year, 12 months.
You have. I thought you were going in chronological order, because you were at the point of saying that something unconstitutional.
Oh yes.
Had taken place.
How could I forget that?
And I indicated to you that what happens in Parliament is legal and constitutional. Now, the Committee for National Salvation was not in Parliament. The Committee for National Salvation had discussions with the representatives of the political parties, including members of the Labour Party cabinet who had resigned, submitted their resignation from the government, and members of the opposition.
How many members of the government resigned?
More than half of the cabinet.
More than half?
More than half of the cabinet.
But the meeting, the very first meeting of the Committee of National Salvation, when it was held, I think more than half was actually in there's about 7. There were 7 guys, because I read that Mr. Christian, who did not resign,
correct,
was called in. I'm not so sure it's by you, but was called in to go in and to support the fact that Patrick John should not be the Prime Minister.
Well, the Committee for National Salvation, having come to the conclusion that the way out of the impasse was for the government, a vote of no confidence in the government of Patrick John, and for an interim Prime Minister who would have the support of a majority of the members of the Parliament. That is taking the
hold that thought. Someone's on the line for a while. Let's just hear what the person has to say. Good evening to you, caller.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. President.
How are you, sir?
I'm fine. By the way, you taught me at grammar school, and you affected my life. You are the reason why I keep trying to snap both fingers on both hands. You always did that in my class.
Good.
But you said something there which I need to push back on.
Yes.
Regarding Parliament.
Yes.
It is true that what happened in Parliament is illegal.
Yes.
Well, actually, that's not quite true. It has to agree with the Constitution, but...
Yes, of course.
Well, assuming that. However, there was no Speaker of the House, and the only Parliament that would be called was an emergency meeting of the Parliament, and without a Speaker, only the Speaker can call an emergency meeting of the Parliament. So therefore, that meeting of the Parliament at which whatever happened, whatever you claim happened, that meeting of Parliament was unconstitutional.
That is not quite true. And you also know that the Parliament has the privilege to elect a speaker at any time if the speaker is not in his chair.
No, exactly. But however, you can't call the meeting and then elect the speaker. The speaker has to call the meeting. So the question is,
for instance, you will
who called the meeting?
You will know that after an election, you do not have a speaker.
That's right.
Until the first meeting of Parliament is called.
That is correct.
And at that first meeting, the speaker is elected.
That's right.
So the speaker does not summon the meeting.
That is true, but that's the only case in which someone calls Parliament into session other than the speaker or the head of government business. For an emergency meeting of the Parliament to be called, it has to be called by the speaker.
That is not 100%.
But it is, Mr. President. It is, Mr. President. I asked Mr. O.J. Savarin that question.
Yes.
I asked him who called that meeting.
Yes.
I told him, you do know that meeting at which you were made interim Prime Minister, that meeting was unconstitutional, and he had to agree with me. He said I don't know who called the meeting, because he agreed that there was no speaker because the speaker had resigned.
I remember that conversation, because we had this conversation with O.J. Savarin live on radio, and the question was asked, I actually asked him the question too, who called the meeting, and he said he really doesn't know.
Well, the meeting was certainly not called by me. Although I was chairman of the Committee of National Salvation, I was not a member of Parliament.
It could have been called by H.E Charles. Is that we could say that?
I doubt that.
But she couldn't.
I doubt that the leader of the opposition.
She couldn't. She had a power
of the Parliament. But I can research that particular point, because I was not a member of the Parliament. I would not have received a notice for a meeting of Parliament, because only members would receive notice.
Exactly.
So I am not in a position to tell you who summoned the meeting or who issued the notice. It's not a matter I've ever addressed before, but I can assure you I will look into that particular matter. I like to have the historical facts of any matter as accurate as possible. So I am very happy that you've raised this matter, and I will look into it to satisfy myself as to on whose authority that particular meeting was held. But the meeting was...
Does it call her?
Well, actually, Mr. President just said something which triggered something that's in my mind.
Yes.
You in your interview with Mr. Titt.
Yes.
You mentioned this thing about the president satisfying himself.
Yes.
Being satisfied.
Correct.
And you implied in that interview that someone had to tell you for you to be satisfied.
Not someone. The appropriate authority.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
But here you are saying now that to be satisfied, you must go and find out. So why wouldn't you finding out apply to that question that Mr. Titt asked you?
No. But these are apples and oranges.
Okay. All right. Okay. I will grant that. I won't argue that there. But since I'm on,
yes,
since I'm on, let me ask you one thing, because we're talking about the Constitution.
Yes.
And I like the statements you made regarding the letter of the Constitution and not other things. You have served your country well for 10 years
as president, but for much more than that.
Yeah, as president. And you followed in the footsteps of the 9 other men before you. In that
eight others before me.
8 others before you. In that you, just like you did not appoint a parliamentary commissioner, even though the Constitution requires it. Can you explain that to me and the nation? Because the Constitution says that there shall be a parliamentary commissioner, and the president shall appoint him after consultation with the prime minister and the opposition leader. And none of the presidents, including you, ever did it. Can you explain that to the people of Dominica?
That is because in the exercise of his powers under the Constitution, the president needs to be, again, satisfied that he does not act in vain. Now, a parliamentary commissioner has to be paid a salary. A parliamentary commissioner has to be given an office. A parliamentary commissioner has to have a staff. A parliamentary commissioner has to have a deputy parliamentary commissioner. Now, none of these things can be provided by the president. These have to be provided by the Treasury. And the president cannot impose a charge on the Treasury which the government is not prepared or disposed or willing to implement. So the president would have to be advised that for instance, like all of the commissions that are established, the president is advised on the establishment, say, of the Electoral Commission, where the president receives from the government or the leader of government business, the prime minister, nominations for persons to be appointed on the advice of the prime minister. The president receives advice from the leader of the opposition on the names of persons to be appointed on the advice of the leader of the opposition. And the president, in his own deliberate judgment, appoints a chairman. Now there are budgetary provisions for the payment of stipends or salaries, as it were, to these commissioners. Now, to appoint commissioners, and there's no provision either for staff, now you have the whole electoral office and all of these things, or for salaries, or for office space, so then you would be acting in vain.
I like the clarification that you have just given on that matter.
Do you follow me? I mean, if the president just comes and say, I appoint Cecil Joseph parliamentary commissioner, where does Cecil Joseph sit as parliamentary commissioner? The president cannot give him an office. Where does Cecil Joseph get his salary as parliamentary commissioner? Where does Cecil Joseph get his staff as parliamentary commissioner? So the president's appointment of Cecil Joseph, or any other person, Cecil is looking at me, so I use his name, would be to act in vain, and the president does not act in vain.
I like that clarification that you have just given on that matter. Not in so many words I've mentioned that to that same caller, but I like the clarification that you have given to him, and I hope that he has a very clear understanding now as to his concerns. So, yes, Mr. President, we are coming back in reference to 79 and the legality of the of the government at the time. I have the concern. I've always had the concern of the inauguration of the prime minister at the time, H.E Charles, and the way it was done.
Well, the inauguration of the prime minister would be when the prime minister took his oath before the president. Now, the president in office at the time had absconded. That is Digazon.
Right.
He had left the state surreptitiously. I understand in the back of a van and things of that nature, driven up to Melbourne Hall and so on. But that is, anyhow, he had left the state. So there was no president. The Constitution provides that if when the office of the president is vacant, the prime minister shall consult with the leader of the opposition on the nomination of a person to be president. And if the prime minister and the leader of the opposition agree on the nomination of the person, that fact is declared to the parliament, and the person is considered as having been elected.
So it's a good thing you said that, because I was about to bring that up, Mr. Savarin, Mr. President. We are all aware that H.E Charles, opposition leader, and Patrick John, Prime Minister of Dominica, who was already, after the 29th of May, signed a declaration, so you call it, where they named, I think with the bishop, the bishop was part and parcel of it. The third person was the bishop.
No. The bishop might have been involved in discussions about the entire situation.
Okay, so yes, it was the discussion. So the bishop was the third party involved in the discussion.
Whether he was or was not.
But he doesn't have the power.
No, it's
Right.
moot.
Right.
The Constitution provides that if the Prime Minister and leader of the opposition agree, now how they agree, if they agree on the suggestion of X or Y or whatever the case may be, the Constitution says if or where they agree on a joint nomination, that fact shall be declared to the Parliament.
But when on the 25th, I think thereabout of July,
Yes.
Oliver Seraphine was already the president was already the prime minister of Dominica, and there was no president.
No, Oliver Seraphine could not be Prime Minister without there being a president.
If you go through the Hansard,
No,
you will see through the Hansard that when Eden Bowers, who
Yes.
was then the Speaker of the House,
Right.
he addressed H.E Seraphine as prime minister in the Hansard.
But well, let me tell you,
Yes.
for many years after Prime Minister Skerritt was Prime Minister, people addressed him as Rosie Douglas. So because his immediate predecessor was Rosie Douglas, his first name is Roosevelt Skerritt. So but if in Parliament you say Prime Minister, the Hansard is a verbatim record of what is said in Parliament. So the Hansard would write Prime Minister whether the Speaker was correct to address him as Prime Minister or not. The Speaker would have known what the arrangements were. Now, the Prime Minister is not appointed necessarily. It's very seldom. As a matter of fact, I do not know of any example where the Prime Minister is appointed in Parliament. The Parliament, a majority of the elected members of Parliament, informs the President that they support a particular person, an elected member, to be Prime Minister. On that basis, the President is empowered to administer the oath of office to that person. Now, that usually takes place, the Constitution does not require it to take place there, but it usually takes place in the
office of the President.
And not in the Parliament.
But I recall from the Hansard that every person who was present at that meeting, at the time there was no Patrick John, there was no Vic Riviere, there was no Leo Austin. So there are a few people from the at the time government of 29th of May who were not present, but you had H.E Seraphine present.
Since you have 11 plus,
right? So that's why I said to you earlier on that there was a majority of the people. So a greater majority of the elected members did not resign.
Nobody resigned from the Parliament. Nobody resigned from the Parliament.
As ministers.
They resigned
as ministers. Right.
Nobody, Patrick John or Vic, nobody resigned as a member of Parliament. They resigned as members of cabinet. They wrote letters to the Prime Minister.
And I'm happy that you're saying that, because people are of the view that these people resigned as parliamentarians. Many people are of the view, and I'm happy that you are making that clarification.
I do not know, and I can't hold myself responsible.
No, you're making a very good clarification for people out there.
Nobody resigned as a member of Parliament. They resigned as members of the cabinet, as ministers of government.
Right.
So their presence in the Parliament, whether they had resigned as a minister or not, was entirely legal because they were members of Parliament.
And I understand that, and I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And as I said, I'm happy that you're making that clarification for a number of people, because a number of people are still of the view that those persons who resigned as parliamentarian. They did not resign as parliamentarian. They resigned as members of cabinet. So Luke Corrett was one.
Luke Corriett resigned as a minister.
As a minister.
That's correct.
Right. So I'm saying, sir, that in reference to way after 29th of May,
Yes.
there was Parliament.
Yes.
And in that first sitting of that emergency meeting, it was
Right.
called an emergency meeting,
Right.
which I think your committee summoned.
That would not be correct, because the committee was not part of the Parliament. The agreement and the arrangement of the Committee of National Salvation, with the decision to seek to identify somebody who the Parliament could support. Part of this was also that the senators would resign and new senators would be appointed on the advice of, as the Constitution provides, the Prime Minister, which would then be H.E Savarin, and leader of the opposition, H.E Charles. And then now you had 9 new senators who became members of Parliament.
You know, one of these days, Mr. Savarin, because there's so much more things I want to discuss on that issue. I'm going to get you so the two of us can sit here and help to give a greater clarification. I'll get the Hansard. I'll get much more of the other documents that will support my findings, so that we can have a more open and understanding discussion to the general public.
Our discussion is open,
no.
but you would then be able to refer to what you think is the authority for the points of view that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And we would look at it and to see whether your interpretation is correct.
As I said, we will definitely have some time in the future, if God give us the life, to come back and have that discussion. In 1980,
yes,
the Freedom Party came into power.
Correct.
Were you made a senator?
I was.
Right, you were a senator and then you were given the Ministry of without portfolio?
Not in 1980.
Not in 1980, that would have been 1985.
No, in 1983.
1983. Thanks for the correction.
That was when Baba Dai was fired.
Oh, that's when Baba Dai was fired, that's correct, in 1983.
Correct.
Now, at that time in 1980, what was your position outside of being just a senator?
I was the General Secretary of the Civil Service Association.
So you were the General Secretary, and did you have to resign to accept the position of senator?
No.
So you were still a senator?
But I was not a civil servant.
You were not a civil servant?
No.
So that's the reason why people tend to think that from the very beginning that you were associated to the Freedom Party and the intention was not that of the Civil Service Association, but that of the intention of the Freedom Party.
But I don't know when you say who. I mean, you may be
Some people.
You may be expressing a personal view.
No, not a personal view. I said to you that if I open the line now, if I'm to open the line now, Mr. Savarin, you're going to have a number of people who are going to say, based on what you just answered.
Yes.
You said that you were a senator.
That is correct.
You were still then the General Secretary of the Civil Service Association.
That is correct.
And the Civil Service Association I would like to believe, should have an unbiased decision.
Go ahead.
In terms of working towards the members which belonging to the employer, which you are now an employer of.
When I won the election in Roseau Central in 1995, I had been general manager we've skipped a few years, so we can always make that up. And my election was challenged on the grounds that I was a civil servant. Now, I was general manager of the NDC. Now, we mentioned Luke Corriett and Eden Bowers, who worked for DBS and were elected members. That was because DBS was not, at that time, part of the civil service. It was a statutory corporation. The NDC similarly was not part of the civil service. It was a statutory corporation. And my election was challenged on the basis that I was a civil servant.
They may not have been aware, but that was wrong if they did that.
No, well, it was challenged on that basis. Now, I remember the judge saying that he himself, because he in fact ruled against me, the Court of Appeal, of course, did not agree with him, that he does not see that I would have a difficulty in serving as general manager of the NDC with the United Workers' Party as the government, but for other persons that might prove to be of some difficulty. And he made some other statements about if the argument had been that I was a civil servant, that the argument would fail, but the argument was that I was employed in a branch of the civil service, and therefore he finds for the petitioners. Now, for me...
Well, employed in a branch of the civil...
For me, a branch of the civil service is the civil service.
It's a civil service.
A branch of a mango tree.
It's a mango tree.
You can't get...
It's a mango.
You can't get cocoa.
You can't get coconut from mango tree.
Of a mango tree. But that was his finding.
No, you mean that from the courts?
The High Court.
You mean that's from the High Court?
The High Court. And the matter was
that's amazing.
The matter was appealed to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal found that neither the judge nor the lawyers for the parties understood the Constitution, because the Constitution provides that you are disqualified from being a member of Parliament if you are employed in the service of the government in a civil capacity.
You would have to resign if you want to make yourself available.
Prior to your nomination.
Right, prior to your nomination.
Because if you are, not if you're employed by the government, because there are lots of people employed by the government. I mean, fellas who are doing contracts on various government contracts are employed by the government. But they are not civil servants. They're not appointed by the Public Service Commission. And there is no restriction, therefore, on their political rights, because they're not in the employ of the government in a civil capacity. So I merely bring that in to point out that I was not a public officer in 1975 or 1980. I had resigned from the civil service. I was full-time with the Civil Service Association. Now, in certain constitutions, for instance, in the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, there is provisions for what they refer to as independent senators. And the General Secretary of the Public Service Union at that time was a senator in the House, in the Trinidad House. He was not a civil servant either, but the independent senators usually came from the trade unions, from the private sector, and things of that nature. But that is in their constitution. In our constitution, there's no provisions for independent senators. The senators are appointed on the advice of. Now, the Prime Minister is free to recommend any person, whether the person is a member of his party or not, to the President. It is his recommendation. And the Leader of the Opposition is free, similarly, to recommend any person to the President to be appointed as a senator, whether the person, for instance, now where we have independent elected members in the opposition. Each of the members recommended to the President, well, through the official Leader of the Opposition, because only the Leader of the Opposition can make a formal request to the President under the Constitution. But the arrangements among them, which the President will take no notice of, was that the independent member for Marigot would nominate 2, and the independent member for Salisbury would nominate 2. But the independent member for Salisbury, being the Leader of the Opposition, would advise the President of all 4 names to be appointed as senators. And whether or not how the 4 names were arrived at, the President himself would take no notice. All he would be interested in is that the Leader of the Opposition recommends to him 4 names to be appointed as senators. So whether or not these are party members or not party members, because the word political party is not in the Constitution, I don't think very many people know that. But the word political party or Labour Party, UWP, Freedom Party, DUPP, none of those expressions are to be found in the Constitution. The Constitution speaks of members and persons elected or persons appointed. There's the word political party. It talks about the person who has the support of the majority of the elected members. It doesn't talk about the majority of the members of a political party.
If the semantics of things, we know what it means.
No, we know what it says. We know what it says. Because, you look at what is happening in various other countries around the world where no political party has a majority and has never had a majority.
Israel is one.
Israel is one. Since the founding of the State of Israel.
Since 1945.
No single party has ever had a majority. And they've always had coalitions. Germany, since after the war, has always had coalitions. And a number of other countries, as opposed to the United Kingdom and France and so on.
So you're saying that you then in 1983 became senator. You were already a senator, but you became minister without portfolio.
Right. I resigned then from the Civil Service Association.
Right. That's the question I was asking earlier on. Whether
I
you resign
to take up an
appointment
of
that. Right. You did.
Yes.
So that is fine. In 85, what happened?
In 85, I contested the election as a member of the Freedom Party.
In Portsmouth.
In Portsmouth.
Right.
And lost.
That same year you became ambassador? Is that same year?
86.
1986. You became ambassador in Brussels. And that is an interesting part that I want us to discuss, because many people are not aware of the work that you would have done during that period for the banana industry. Help us, give us a guide as to...
It is amazing, because I believe today, or probably yesterday, at the President's Charities dinner, I didn't see you there.
Was that another function? But it was paid for.
I was sitting at the table, and the whole discussion of Brussels came up. And I pointed out to the gentleman that I was speaking with that, following in 1993, we've skipped 7 years, right? Just before I left Brussels to come back, we had agreed on the European Union Regulation 404, which was what provided for continued preferential access for bananas from the ACP into the European market. The Deputy Director General of the DG8, which was the directorate that dealt with functional cooperation, an Englishman by the name of Peter Pulley, said to me, when you return home and they set up a monument in your name for the work which you did here in Brussels for bananas, I hope you'll ask them to have my name inscribed at the bottom. That is his name, Peter Pulley, because we worked together and I must say he himself was very cooperative. I mean, he represents the European Union and the view of the European Union, but we worked very well together. The thing that happened was when I went to Brussels in 1986, the United Kingdom, France, and Spain had separate import regimes for bananas. So the United Kingdom imported bananas from the Caribbean, primarily Jamaica and the Windward Islands, and some also from Belize. France imported primarily from West Africa and Martinique and Guadeloupe. Spain from some of the Spanish territories, and Portugal from Madeira. But then the European Union now went into this evolution to create the single market so that you would now have a single set of rules for imports of all goods into the common market. So the British import regime would become secondary, would be subsumed, as it were, by the common market rules, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese. So we had now to negotiate the rules now on the basis of which bananas would be imported into the European market as opposed to being imported into the United Kingdom. Now, although it still went to the United Kingdom, but it went to the United Kingdom as part of the European market. And now this became very difficult because Germany, Holland, and a number of these, what they refer to as free market European countries, imported bananas from anywhere, mostly from Latin America. And the provisions that existed in the UK, which provided us preferential access, their inclination was to do away with preferential access so that Britain would now have to import on the same basis that Germany and Holland and these countries were importing. And our job now was to seek to preserve in the new European arrangements as much of the preferential access that we had in the United Kingdom and the Africans had in France and things of that nature. And that was, in fact, Peter Pulley said that the banana dossier was the most difficult dossier that had ever crossed his table as a civil servant. So it took us weeks and months and years to eventually come up with a regulation that the European Council and the European Parliament would approve. And that became the law. But soon afterwards, that was challenged in the European Court. And a lot of the protection that was contained in the Regulation 404 became to be whittled gradually until we no longer had preferential access.
Is this because that the United States, who joined with Portugal and Germany, I think, to take us to the WTO, the World Trade Organization courts, would you say that in reference to the open market,
yes,
that these countries saw us as a disadvantage or an advantage, why they would have placed so much pressure on us?
In the first instance, Germany was never very happy, but it was part of the European Union. Holland was never very happy, it was part of the European Union, but we managed to get a majority in the parliament. The United States now, on behalf of Dole, Chiquita, and Del Monte, which were American multinationals operating in Latin America primarily and also in some African countries, challenged the agreement on the grounds that they were contrary to the rules of the GATT at that time, which provided for free trade. And they got ruling after ruling, which sort of ate away at the preferences which we had, reduced the quotas, reduced the duties, reduced the this and so on, until eventually, because the reasons for that was that we were more expensive producers than, say, Latin American countries, where land is extensive, mechanization, bulk purchases of inputs make for lower cost. Labor cost is much less. So all of the inputs that went into production resulted in a product which was much cheaper on the market than what we could produce. So what allowed us to sell on the market was that these Latin American or non-ACP bananas, there was a duty or a tariff that they paid, which increased the price on the market. So our bananas, which did not attract a tariff, was then able to compete on the market. But as the tariff dropped lower and lower, the price on the market of these competing bananas became lower and lower, and our bananas now, in comparison to theirs, was more expensive, so that we were squeezed out of the market. There was a time, for instance, when banana farmers would sell their bananas to the United Kingdom, and they would receive debit notes. That is to say, what they got from the market. Because remember, what the farmers got was what is referred to as residual price. The price of shipping, the price of ripening, the price of everything else was taken, and then what was left went to the farmer. And so it became uncompetitive, particularly for the smaller farmers.
You feel that while you were in Brussels fighting for the farmers and trying to get the farmers a good price on the market, a good deal on the market, and while some others are here in Dominica to say that I could give you $1 for a pound of banana, what was the reality on this?
Well, even before we came to that point, because I remember saying, and he's still alive, to Vanos John Charles, who was the president of WinBan or chief executive or whatever the case would be. And I said and he came to Brussels quite often and so on. And I said to him, I said, look, Vanos, I believe that the function of WinBan is to seek to get the best quality bananas on the market. All of this fighting that is taking place in the Windward Islands is not necessary. Focus on getting the best quality bananas. Let us in Brussels focus now on access. But our efforts will become a nonsense if there are no bananas to purchase. So we have to keep our volumes up, and we have to keep our quality up. And so the role of WinBan and the local associations would be to provide the volumes and the quality, and let us in Brussels focus on access, the terms under which these bananas are received. And when I came back here, and with the experience that I had, knowing what the pressures were, and statements were made about increasing the price, offering $1 a pound and all of that, that had no relationship with the reality of what was happening in the market. And the persons who made those statements were aware of that, but in politics, a lot of things are said.
No, in terms of reparation.
Reparation?
Yes. Could you not negotiate with the Europeans in reference to the amount of energy our own people had to put in their own development, that they could give it back to us in the banana prices? But before you answer, let's go to the telephone quickly. Good evening to you, caller. I'm sorry about that. The caller couldn't wait. Yes, go ahead.
You're talking about price or reparations?
No, I'm talking about reparation in exchange.
Reparations in the common use of the term.
In exchange.
Well, it would be very difficult, to my mind, to mix the question of reparations with the cost of producing any crop or commodity.
Mm-hmm.
I think reparations is a political concept, whereas terms of access are commercial. So there's a political and there's a commercial, and the two are not the same, because the question of reparation has to do with the deprivation of the basic rights, the commercial rights, the political rights of people over an extended period of time, whether it was through slavery or indenture or things of that nature, which is a different argument to my mind than the question of commodity prices, because the fact of slavery and indenture and discrimination existed, whether they were commodities or they are commodities or not. So one has to look at the political discussion and justification of those things, which I think is a different argument.
Let's go back to the telephone quickly. Good evening.
Hello, good night.
Good evening.
Savarin, how are you?
Keeping very well, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Savarin, you know, I would just like to tell you that I hail you.
Thank you.
I hail you because you are a special man for me in Dominica. I do not know for others, but whenever I hear about this name, Dr. Charles Savarin,
Not
as a
yet
very
a
great man.
PhD.
I do not know. I do not know what doctor you are, but Mr. Savarin, you are a doctor.
Thank
And
you.
I do not believe that you will get one in Dominica like you. But some things you did, you know who's speaking to you, Mr. Savarin?
It sounds like a gentleman from Granby.
Yes, that is Concom. 30 years later.
Indeed.
Mr. Savarin, you could remember once I came to your office when he was Minister of National Security.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, when a certain gentleman from Antigua, who is the Prime Minister, was coming to Dominica.
Indeed.
And you know this sort of advice that you give to me?
Was it good advice?
It was very good advice, Mr. Savarin. But Mr. Savarin, I am coming back to you soon, and very soon I will get you where you live in for you to give me an advice that has to do with the same ongoing matter.
Okay.
So anytime from now, you will see the same man come to you. Mr. Savarin, I love you. I love what you have done for Dominica. They can say what they want with you. About you, I always know, viens non pas jamais tuer en what. There is an animal that carries leptopyrosis, they call rat.
That is true.
And you know, leptopyrosis killing people and it have never killed a rat.
It hasn't killed a rat up to now.
So, Mr. Savarin, you are a very good man. I love you. I will spring for you. And I believe that the blessing of God is with you and it will always continue, be with you for the good work you have done for Dominica. Have a good night, Mr. Savarin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Savarin, let's go quickly coming to the end. Let's go quickly into your presidency, the reign. Help us. Give us 3 minutes of information
I prefer to say the service.
The service.
I don't think that presidents in Dominica reign. They serve. And I think it is an honor and a privilege to be elected to serve your country as its president, its top public officer. I believe that all of my working life contributed to my understanding of the functions that I would have to perform in that particular office. I can say it is not an office that I aspired to. I can say to you that in all of my involvement, whether it is in industrial relations, trade unionism, diplomatic service, politics as a PAREP, Minister of Government, it's not an office that I aspired to. And I only began to think about it when President Liverpool indicated that he would not be able to continue as president for health reasons. But I kept that to myself. I didn't discuss that with anybody because you don't tell people, look, I want to be president. Can you nominate me? There is no lobbying or campaigning that you do. You're called, you receive a call. Usually you're caught totally by surprise when in my case, the Prime Minister says to you that I would want to put your name forward to be president of Dominica. So that having happened, the office itself, as you know, from 1993 2013, 2015, 2019, all of the election cycles had their own challenges. There are other situations which developed where the persons felt that the president could do certain things which the Constitution does not allow him to do. And I think you have to be extremely level-headed in that particular position. You have to familiarize yourself thoroughly with the Constitution and the privileges and powers that is conferred upon you by the Constitution and the law, because there are applicable law which also influence the performance of the president. And do your level best always to act within the provisions of the law and the Constitution.
You said challenges in 13
to 23.
To 23. What were the biggest challenges that you would have had in that period of elections?
I would think that one of the major challenges would have been the 2019, I believe, elections, when people were camped outside of the State House at what they refer to as Independence Square or something kind of that is around
Negmawa.
The Negmawa monument that we have there, where people demanded to see the president. They claimed that the president had the power to postpone the elections and that he should proceed to postpone elections and to do all sorts of things. And various groups of persons came and made various... the thing is, I personally see myself as president of listening to everybody. So if somebody wants to see me to discuss a particular matter, I will receive him. I will listen to him, but I will indicate to him whatever it is that the law and the Constitution allows the president to do, and that the president cannot act outside of the provisions of the law and the Constitution. Some people are not very pleased. One or two persons banged their hand on the table, and I had to caution them that we don't behave like this in the office of the president. And unless they behave themselves, I may have to ask the police to put them outside. I will listen to you, but I expect you to behave in a respectful manner when you are here. So that was something that was very, very challenging, because there is a provision of the Constitution which allows the president or permits the president to postpone an election, but only if he is satisfied that the conditions do not exist for the holding of the election. No, those conditions would have to be completed electoral list, election materials, the question of having returning officers in place, polling booths in place, and all of the various things that are necessary for the holding of an election. Not the question of differences of opinion by members of the public on various issues. That does not constitute conditions that would prevent the holding of an elections, because the electoral office, the Electoral Commission, has a specific mandate to prepare for the holding of elections. And when once the president is advised by the Prime Minister to dissolve Parliament and to issue a writ for the holding of an election, then the Electoral Office has the amount of time provided between the dissolution. But the Electoral Office exists in perpetuity, so it always has to be ready. It cannot begin to be ready when the House is dissolved. It always has to be ready. But then there are final things to put in place, returning officers to be appointed, polling booths and polling stations to be identified, final lists to be prepared and posted, electoral materials such as ballot papers, indelible ink, and all of these things has to be available so that the actual polling day activities can take place as smoothly as possible. If that cannot be done, then they would inform the president, look, we cannot prepare the list, we do not have returning officers, something which is essential is not in place for the election to be held on the date that has been announced. And then the president would exercise his authority under the provisions of the law to postpone the election. And the law also says for not more than 90 days. But provided it is impossible, that the conditions are such that the electoral office cannot put all of the necessary measures in place for the holding of the ballot.
I know that you said that you like numbers. Would you remember how many countries that Dominica, during your period, that Dominica would have had bilateral relationships with?
Well, that is not a function of the Office of the President. That is a function of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister's office. But we did establish bilateral relations with a number of countries. Where the Office of the President becomes involved is that when once an ambassador is appointed by his government, then he has to present his credentials to the president of Dominica or of any country before he can enter upon the performance of his functions as ambassador. But the decision to establish diplomatic relations, that is not a decision of the president. It is a decision of the cabinet, the prime minister, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
What is your biggest moment sitting in this in the position of president?
Well, there are a number of activities which I take pride in. I think that Dr. Liverpool's establishment of the President's Charities Foundation is a tremendous initiative on behalf of the Office of the President, which enables the office through the Charities Foundation to raise funds and then to use these monies to support charitable organizations. And we do this on an annual basis, and it gives me great pleasure to visit these organizations, to make a presentation, to hear the appreciation of these, because these charitable organizations do wonderful work in Dominica, and that is good. Also, in the initial 4 years, I think, of my presidency, I visited almost every school on the island, and meeting with the schools and the students and interacting with them, that too is a matter of great satisfaction. And on an annual basis, we brought in school children, usually on a regional basis, to the State House, where we have a Christmas party for them, and it is good to see the children enjoying themselves and to interact with them and things of that nature. And receiving ambassadors and holding discussions with them on issues of significant political interest. I pride myself on being very informed about these issues, and these discussions, which are private, with the ambassadors who come to present their credentials, I think is enlightening both for me and for the ambassador himself. These are usually very private discussions which take place.
Final question for the night. What words of advice would you give to the present president?
Well, I think one has to be very cautious about presuming to advise the president, your successor in office, as to what he or she should or should not do. I think generally speaking that one has to familiarize oneself with the provisions of the Constitution as to what the role of the president is, so that one is not led to believe what people say that the president can do, should do, or is required to do, but is familiar with what the Constitution and the law permits the president to do. I think it is good for the president to be available to members of the public, organizations, interest groups who would wish to dialogue with the president on whatever it is that they would wish to hold such a dialogue. That can be very useful and so on. I think it is important for the president to have a good working relationship with the prime minister, the leader of the opposition, the government of the day. Because you may find yourself in a situation where the president is appointed by one government and then has to work with another government, as happened, for instance, with the case of President Shaw, who was voted in when the United Workers' Party was the government. The election that came brought in the Labour Party, and Mr. Shaw continues in his office as president until his term of office expires. Because the president's term of office is not co-terminus with that of the government. The elections can be held at any time and the government can change. The president's term of office continues until the 5th year. Then the parliament will decide whether or not he will serve a second term. But the Constitution does not allow him to serve a third term. So the Constitution envisages that a change of government does not bring about a change of president automatically, except when the term of office of the president expires. And if it is the first term, he may be elected for a second term. And if it is the end of his second term, then the Constitution does not provide for any further appointment.
Thank you very much. Your last words.
Well, Cecil, I think you provided me with an opportunity to explain certain things. You have your own views about certain things, which I think is very refreshing. Also provides me with an opportunity to explain those things, and the listeners can get a better understanding, because there are a lot of interpretations, understandings, which are not necessarily related to the facts. We as a people are emotional, and we form attachments, and we view events on the basis of our perception, not necessarily on the basis of the actual facts of the issue, but our perceptions. It is almost like religion. Certain religions believe certain things, and certain other religions believe other things. And on the point of where they differ, they differ. And you are not going to persuade a person of one particular religion of the point of view of your particular religious beliefs. So you just accept that we differ on certain aspects of religious belief. And so too in events which unfold, we all put on political spectacles, as it were, and we see developing events based from our own political perspective, which sometimes is good, but sometimes can be unfortunate, because that can lead to a misunderstanding and holding points of view which are not necessarily in accordance with the facts of the case.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Charles Savarin. I can tell you that you are open to a number of media houses, not just in Dominica, but I'm sure in the region, to maybe have interviews of that nature. As a matter of fact, I can tell you, while speaking with you, that there was this group of people in the United States who have they call themselves Touch. They said they want me to get in touch with you for them, so that you can do a Zoom with them. They would like to do a Zoom with you because they're very much elated of the fact that you were able to come here and speak on so many different issues and matters, and they would like to maybe have an interview with you. So I'm sure that they are not the only ones thinking about that. I'm sure that there are many others who are going to really want to get a piece of you, and I'm happy that I was one of the first to do just so. I heard last week that you did one with Daryl Teat.
I did.
But this one it's longer, and much more information came out. So I really want to say to you, thank you very much for your time. We stayed some 3 hours and 25 minutes together, and I really want to say thank you so very much, sir.
Thank you, Cecil, and thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. President, His Excellency Mr. Charles Savarin, as we hear and we are live at this nation station, DBS Radio. I want to thank all those persons who were involved and really helping in the whole process of what we are actually doing at DBS Radio through the LACO program. I want to say thank you so very much, Mr. Savarin, and I hope that you continue to do well in the Commonwealth of Dominica.